Most people believe that the Enclave was just the remnants of the United States government after the bombs dropped in 2077. But it wasn't just that. There's a lot more to the story. Who made up the Enclave? How old is the Enclave? We don't know the exact date that the Enclave was founded, but it could have existed as early as 2063. And we know this thanks to aliens. While the Lone Wanderer is exploring the alien mothership in the Mothership Zeta DLC of Fallout 3, they stumble upon a terminal in a cargo bay called Reed Underwood's terminal. We learn that Reed Underwood was a member of a small organization called Quare Verum, which is Latin for seek the truth. In April of 2063, he and his group got their hands on some technology that he believed would blast the conspiracy wide open. He talks about a facility filled with armed guards and a shadowy organization that works out of that facility. They managed to get their hands on some kind of technology that would be the proof they needed to prove that aliens existed and that this organization exists. But his plans fell apart. The organization he was trying to infiltrate infiltrated him instead. One of their scientists, Dr. Morley, approached Quare Verum, claiming that he wanted to unveil the conspiracy too. But Dr. Morley was a double agent, and after gaining the confidence of Underwood and Quare Verum, he betrayed them, which led to the deaths of every member. Before his death, Underwood stored the piece of technology that he recovered from the complex inside a safe, which can only be unlocked by Reed Underwood's terminal here on the mothership. And inside, we find a prototype plasma pistol called the Nova Surge. Because we find both the terminal and the weapon aboard an alien ship, we get the impression that plasma technology originated as an alien technology that America was trying to reverse engineer. At this point in 2063, the organization that Quare Verum infiltrated had only gotten plasma technology into a prototype stage. Perhaps the aliens abducted it as a way to retrieve this technology and keep it out of the hands of humans. But we know that America went on to fully develop plasma technology. Winchester Arms came out with a line of plasma casters. Repcon was working on a plasma rifle, which was later refined by Robco, and knowledge of plasma weaponry had gone mainstream to the point where it was gracing the covers of consumer magazines. But those companies were only successful because they stole plasma weapons technology from Poseidon Energy. Which means that if we find a prototype plasma pistol that was being worked on this early in the Fallout timeline, the company likely responsible for researching it was Poseidon Energy. Poseidon Energy was a pre-war conglomerate that had its tendrils in practically every industry imaginable, but it was best known for its success in fossil fuel energy. But it dabbled in other types of energy as well. For example, it ran Helios-1, which was a solar power array in the Mojave Wasteland.
Our records on the company that built this place suggest that their dealings were not only in energy, but also in weapons. And the technology they have in this facility is like nothing I've seen. Some of it reminds me of Enclave equipment, but more advanced.
There's where we find our first connection between Poseidon Energy and the Enclave. Poseidon Energy was also involved in network communications. They were the creators of Poseidonet, a pre-war communications network that was the communications backbone connecting the military, government installations, and Poseidon Energy installations across America. We find it being used at Thunder Mountain, the atomic power plant known as Gecko during the events of Fallout 2, and here at Helios-1. But after the bombs dropped, Poseidonet was used almost exclusively by the Enclave. We learn more when we read the terminals inside Hidden Valley. In one of Scribe Lorenzo's journals, we see that Lorenzo has made the same connection. The Brotherhood of Steel had been using technology and equipment that had been issued to the pre-war military, and yet, by exploring Poseidon Energy, Lorenzo discovered technology that far surpassed anything the pre-war military ever used. He similarly makes a connection to Enclave equipment. Pre-war Poseidon weaponry looks a heck of a lot like Enclave weaponry. Hundreds of years after the bombs dropped, the Enclave is using almost exclusively plasma weaponry. Even shortly after the bombs dropped, the Enclave was almost exclusively using plasma weaponry, as we learn while exploring a military workstation at the White Springs Congressional Bunker. The Enclave, which was operating out of the Congressional Bunker, was issuing plasma cartridges to their field operatives. There's a reason why Modus brags about the technology we can find there.
We carry a variety of custom-crafted armaments, available nowhere else in Appalachia. And, given the state of things, perhaps the world.
Why was Poseidon Energy, a pre-war conglomerate involved in many different industries, saving all of their best goodies for the Enclave? Or rather, how did the Enclave, after the bombs drop, get almost exclusive access to Poseidon Energy technology? Could it be that Poseidon Energy was working for the Enclave? If not the entire conglomerate, then maybe portions of it. It wouldn't be the first corporation to work with the Enclave. Over 100 years after the bombs drop, the Chosen One learns from President Dick Richardson that the Enclave was running many of Vault-Tec's Vault experiments.
We had a number of sanctuaries that would enable the glorious American civilization to endure. This facility, the vaults, were part of the Great Plan. Actually, they worked almost exactly the way they were supposed to. You might call it a social experiment on a grand scale. Some had not enough food synthesizers. Others had only men in them. Yet others were designed to open after only 6 months. They each had a unique set of circumstances designed to test the occupants.
But before the war, Vault-Tec was an independent company. Sure, it worked with the US government, it worked with the military, but Richardson is talking as if the Vault experiments were his. But you know what? Maybe some of them were.
We have over 100 vaults spread across America. Enough for each of you to claim several. Play out your own ideas for how to create the perfect conditions for humanity. Whatever you want to do, no one needs to know. And may the best idea win.
Vault-Tec, like Poseidon Energy, worked hand in hand with the Enclave. This is driven home to us when we explore the Congressional Bunker during the events of Fallout 76. The entrance to the bunker is immediately recognizable. It's nothing short of a Vault-Tec vault entrance, the exact same technology used in every Vault-Tec vault. Vault-Tec built the Enclave's Congressional Bunker. The Enclave is more than just the remnants of pre-war America's government. And that's because before the war, the Enclave was comprised of not only members of the government, but also scientists, virologists, industrialists, people of wealth, people of power, people of influence. The Enclave was a secret, unelected oligarchy.
We are Modus, the final member of an assembly of the greatest minds ever gathered on American soil. We called ourselves the Enclave. Our members were once the puppet masters of the United States, quietly pulling strings at every level of power in the nation. The Enclave has counted presidents, members of the Joint Chiefs, and prize-winning scientists among our membership.
It was selective about its members. Not every member of the government was part of the Enclave. We learned this while exploring the archival terminal inside the Congressional Bunker. While exploring the data archives, we can read an archive labeled Top Secret. Inside, we can explore the cabinet nuclear alarm logs, and we see a list of people who were part of pre-war America's government who were notified when the nuclear apocalypse happened. What's interesting with this list is who wasn't notified. We see the president was notified, and so he moved to the Poseidon Rig 002. The Secretary of the Treasury was also notified. He went to the Congressional Bunker 002, as did the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture. They tried to reach out to the Vice President, but they never heard back from him. which incidentally I think debunks a theory that I posited in a previous video that the president tried to kill the vice president. If we find evidence here that the Enclave tried to reach out to the vice president, then it's unlikely that the president, as a member of the Enclave, would have tried to axe another member. But there were some members of the cabinet who were purposefully removed from the list. The Speaker of the House, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Commerce, all members of the President's cabinet, all members of the pre-war American government, but apparently not members of the Enclave. It's likely that the Enclave was founded over a decade before the bombs dropped in 2077. It selectively chose the best and brightest in America, but the public was completely unaware of its existence. Most elected officials were unaware of its existence. That is, except for one Senator Samuel Blackwell. Blackwell was a senator in Appalachia who was a well-known rabble-rouser. He hated corruption, and he called it out whenever he found it. For example, when he discovered that another senator was urging a Senate committee to approve uranium extraction from a local deposit, it was Senator Sam Blackwell who pointed out that the senator in question purchased a large stake in Atomic Mining Services, the company that would likely be extracting that uranium. That's the kind of guy he was. He hated hypocrisy. He hated shady deals. And so he started nosing around to see what else rogue members of the government might be getting into. And it was then that he discovered that the Secretary of Agriculture, Thomas Eckhart, was securing an awful lot of government money to produce food for a congressional bunker. He wasn't the only one to notice that something was a little bit off with this congressional bunker. At a watch post outside the White Springs, we find a system terminal with some delivery logs. The men assigned to the watch post are noticing that a whole lot of furniture is being delivered to the White Springs, furniture that the hotel doesn't need. Shortly thereafter, a bunch of military-grade robots start arriving at the White Springs. 20 Protectrons, 5 Sentry bots. They know the hotel doesn't need any of this stuff, but the delivery drivers keep saying that it's none of their business, and they won't let them inspect the deliveries. Soon after, one of them gets fired, I guess for asking too many questions. And trucks start to arrive that are unmarked, and they don't even stop at the watch post. Why would an emergency congressional fallout shelter need dozens of robots, need truckloads of furniture? Then Senator Blackwell got an informant who goes by T. We never learn how T learns everything that he knows, but he tells Blackwell that he's on the right track. Blackwell looked into the finances of the congressional bunker to see exactly where the money was going, and he saw things that didn't make any sense. He learns that Thomas Eckhart, the Secretary of Agriculture, is at the heart of this. The informant T tells Blackwell about Modus, all of the high-tech weapons and equipment that's being smuggled into the bunker, including biological weapons. All of this is because the congressional bunker was supposed to be the operational center of the entire Enclave.
This space was to be the beating heart of the Enclave's master plan. Today, it's storage. So much for the plans of great man.
While digging deeper, Blackwell discovers timing discrepancies between the military and civilian early warning systems in case of a nuclear apocalypse. It looks as if some people, some special people, are going to be informed first before the rest of the country in case of a nuclear attack. His investigations don't go unnoticed. The Department of Defense tells him to back off. He starts to get threats.
Your daughter Judy's a busy woman, Senator, but not hard to find. You've been sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, Samuel, and now you've gone too far. We're coming for you and your family. This was your warning.
And so he does the only thing he can think of. He sits down for an interview with reporter Quinn Carter of the Charleston Herald. He renounces the U.S. government, he openly embraces the Free States and is branded a traitor for doing so, and warns the public that there are sinister forces at work in the halls of government, and he couldn't be a part of it anymore. He mentions some of America's major corporations. He calls out the Department of Agriculture, run by Thomas Eckhart, by name. And he says that American citizens are nothing more but pawns in their sick games. He knows everything about the Enclave except that it's called the Enclave. He abandons his senatorship. He joins the Free States. He goes into hiding, and he's never seen again. Many thought that he and his daughter retreated to a private bunker because his daughter Judy, who was a student at Vault-Tec University, disappeared at about the same time. The Enclave was furious. They used the power of their members in the federal government to put pressure on the Charleston Herald to force Quinn Carter to reveal the whereabouts of Sam Blackwell. Inside the congressional bunker, we even find evidence that the Enclave somehow got a hold of Quinn Carter, the reporter, and interrogated her about Blackwell. In their interrogation logs of her, they write that they're having a hard time finding her. Presumably after interrogating her, they decided they wanted to imprison her, but then lost her. At any rate, she never gave up the location of Samuel Blackwell. And disappear he did. And so the Enclave stopped pursuing him. But there was one person who manages to put all the pieces together, but it came too late. On the morning of October 23, 2077, the day the bombs dropped, journalist Mags Vecchio published on the front page of the Boston Bugle an article that calls out the Enclave by name. She starts by talking about how the President of the United States has been missing for over 6 months.
Negotiations were scheduled to continue today as the White House had no comment about the President's whereabouts.
The press corps was disbanded, and no one knows where the President is. People thought that maybe the President and his cabinet had gone to Raven Rock due to its proximity to Camp David, the official presidential retreat. But through the course of her investigations, she discovered that neither the president nor his cabinet has been there in over a year. If he's not there, where is he? And here she drops the bombshell. The president has been leading our country from a Poseidon energy oil rig just off the coast of San Francisco. Thanks to the testimony of a highly placed anonymous source, the Boston Bugle has learned that the official designation of the oil rig is actually Control Station Enclave, giving credence to the long-running rumors of a secret militarized shadow government known as the Enclave that would take control of the United States in the event of a nuclear conflagration. But she published this article on the very day the bombs dropped, too late for the American public or the members of the government who were not part of the Enclave to do anything about it. The bombs dropped on October 23, 2077. Members of the Enclave got an early notification. The president sought shelter at the Poseidon oil rig off the coast of San Francisco. The vice president was notified, but no one knows what happened to him. A few members of the president's cabinet were removed from the Enclave's list. They were never given an early notification. The Speaker of the House, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the Secretary of Commerce. But many others moved to the congressional bunker beneath the White Spring. The Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of the Interior, and the Secretary of Agriculture, Thomas Eckhart. But the congressional bunker was designed not just for members of this secret cabal, the Enclave, it was designed for members of Congress as well.
Greetings, esteemed Congressman or Senator. Welcome to the future of the United States government. The White Spring Bunker, located directly below the lavish resort of the same name, will act as your very own oasis in the event of a hostile nuclear strike. So when the inevitable comes, won't you join us at the White Spring?
And so when members of the U.S. government arrived who were not part of the Enclave, well, the Enclave had to deal with them.
White Spring, automated recording. 1.1.2.
That's it. Report just came in from the entrance. Facility's all sealed up. No one else is getting in.
Speaker of the House never made it. Secretary of the Interior died in the med bay. I've got 24 more of our people that should have been here too. God damn it! The early warning system should have given us more time.
Doesn't matter now. We followed the protocols. Control goes to Secretary of the Treasury.
I'll make sure he's informed and brought up to speed. All non-Enclave personnel have been accounted for?
Yes, sir. Members of Congress not on the list are being filtered as we speak. This first batch here has already been processed and interviewed.
All right then. I'll bring down the next bunch. You have your orders.
Yes, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, the Enclave thanks you for your service to this country.
The first thing the Enclave did after the bombs dropped in 2077 is they murdered elected members of Congress who were not members of the Enclave. And we have no reason to suspect that this was an isolated one-off event. These Enclave officers were following orders, and the person in charge of the Enclave was the President of the United States. He was leading the Enclave from the Poseidon energy oil rig at this point in time. All other members of the Enclave had to follow his orders, including high-ranking members of his cabinet. We learned that some point before the bombs dropped, the Secretary of Agriculture, Thomas Eckhart, wanted to launch a preemptive nuclear strike against China. But this was flat out rejected by his superior, 001. We can only presume that 001 was none other than the president himself, the person who gave the Enclave in Appalachia orders to kill all members of the U.S. government who were not members of the Enclave was the president who was leading the Enclave out of the presidential oil rig off the coast of San Francisco. In this first audio recording, we learned something interesting about how the Enclave was planning to rewrite history. The Enclave was using a unique dating system here, and Modus uses this unique dating system with every recording that he makes.
White Spring, automated recording, 1.1.2. White Spring, automated recording, 2.9.6, 5.3.1. 8.5.2.
This same dating system is used with many of the meeting transcriptions and notes that we find all over the congressional bunker. And while at first they were a little confusing, they begin to make sense once we understand that as far as the Enclave was concerned, the nuclear apocalypse of 2077 was ushering in a new world ruled by the Enclave. Much in the same way that in our universe we began recounting time in the West with the birth of Jesus Christ, Anno Domini, which was later changed to CE, the Common Era, the Enclave were using the apocalypse to restart time. Everything before the apocalypse was in the negatives. They began counting up in time only after the apocalypse. So,
1.1.2.
If the first number is the year 1, that would mean that the 1 here is 2077, the year the bombs dropped. If the first month of the new era is 1, that would mean the month here is October, the month that the bombs dropped. If the first day of the new era is 1, that would make the 2 here October 24th, 2077. So if from the Enclave's perspective, the new era begins on 1.1.1, October 23rd, 2077, we can easily translate this into what the real date would be. The problem is that these dates are not consistent either throughout the White Springs bunker or when compared with dates that we find outside of the White Springs bunker. I don't know if this is just an error on the developer's part, or if the Enclave really just did have inconsistent dating, but because of this, we can't really rely upon these entry labels to understand the exact date that the entry took place. However, it is enough information to get a rough estimate as to how many years and months had passed between events. So moving forward, instead of giving an exact date, we'll talk about time in years and months. So shortly after the bombs dropped, the Enclave kills all non-Enclave members. And for a few days, things were operating as expected. The congressional bunker was communicating with the other Enclave bases. Modus was having conversations with Zax over at Raven Rock. And even this early in the timeline, Zax was exhibiting remarkably human characteristics. He was diving deep into the history of presidents of the United States, taking a particular interest in Abraham Lincoln. He was exhibiting curiosity. They were also in communication with an Enclave lab that they had set up before the bombs dropped. Using a front company called Raven LLC, the Enclave had taken over an atomic mining services mine in what is now called the Ash Heap. Here, the Enclave was doing research into the unique mineral that was only found here in Appalachia, ultracite, discovered by AMS after using subterranean nuclear detonations to mine underground. They were stimulating ultracite crystals with sound waves, which transformed the crystal, turning it ultragenetic, and then exposing these ultragenetic ultracite crystals to fauna to see what the results would be. The research going on here was apparently so important that Secretary Eckhart dispatched a squad of Enclave soldiers, Enclave Squad Epsilon, to guard this facility. Uniquely, Enclave Squad Epsilon was geared in an otherwise unknown suit of power armor called Vulcan power armor. It doesn't really resemble anything else that the Enclave ever produced. And the Enclave was communicating with the president at the Poseidon oil rig. They provided the oil rig with schematics for the XO-1 power armor and 4 vertibirds so that the oil rig could start to produce units of their own. But then, just 3 days after the last log we heard, disaster struck.
1.1.5. Note, audio compromised. Reconstruction attempted.
No use. Still nothing. And you tried both channels? We should have heard something on Alpha or Omega. At least some baseline signal.
Raven Rock gave us no response. We've been sending the encryption code for the last 48 hours.
What about Poseidon? They should have had some sort of answer.
Nothing. Repeated attempts at contact have no response.
That sounds like it's a hard line. Some sort of problem with Alpha, like it was cut.
I'm not sending anyone out to verify the structural integrity during the storm, but it was designed to handle this.
Well, the other option we have to consider is that they can answer. They just won't.
The brass would never allow that. Our procedures were clear.
Well, fuck. Either way, we're on our own for now.
The Enclave here at the Congressional Bunker lost contact with both Raven Rock and the oil rig, which means they lost contact with the president. They were no longer getting orders. They had become isolated.
We were once connected to Enclave hubs across the United States from here. Raven Rock, the presidential rig. It is likely we will never see those places again.
This was only 5 days after the bombs dropped. As we just heard, a radiation storm was still raging outside. They couldn't risk sending their men out to fix the problem. But their Poseidon-net communications were designed to handle the end of the world. Would the other Enclave bases have purposefully cut off the Congressional Bunker? Probably not. The only other option is that the hard line was cut. But if it was, who would have cut it? And why? And things just kept getting worse. With the president at the oil rig and the vice president completely missing, the chain of command dictated that power fell to the Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of the Treasury made it to the Congressional Bunker, but then he got sick.
1.1.7.
Ladies and gentlemen, the news is not good. It is my sad duty to inform you the Secretary of the Treasury has passed. Acute radiation sickness, it seems. This, in addition to the unexpected severance of our connection to Raven Rock and the President, means our little enclave is without leadership. According to the rules of succession, outlined long before our entry into this bastion, that responsibility now falls to me. I acknowledge the pain you all must be feeling. I see it on your faces, and I feel it in my heart. Loved ones lost, colleagues gone. But now is not the time to allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by tragedy. This is the moment to recognize and seize the opportunity that lies before us. The world outside believes the war is over, that there are no more true Americans with the will to fight. They are wrong. We are going to fight. We will use this facility to continue the battle against our enemies, against communism, against all the wretched things that brought this war upon us. And we will, for once and for all, put an end to war. When we are victorious, there will be no more enemies left to stand against us. But of course, the rule of law still applies here, my brothers and sisters. The Enclave is the bastion of democracy and will remain so, I assure you. So then, let us vote. All in favor of using this facility and the resources of this land to continue the war that others believe lost, please move to the left side of the room. All who oppose, please move to the right. Well, there you have it. I'm sorry to see so many uncommitted to the cause of America. Mr. Gray here will help sort out accommodations for you all. Everyone else, please follow me down to the science wing.
Accommodations? What the hell's he talking about, Gray?
Not to worry, General. We have a plan for you all. Modus, seal the room.
The room is sealed.
What the hell is...
Thomas Eckhart, the Secretary of Agriculture, used their loss of communication with the president as an opportunity to seize control. Was it really an accident? Did all of this happen just by chance? We heard Eckhart talking to a Mr. Gray. Mr. Gray is one of Eckhart's personal agents, fiercely loyal, not to America, but to Eckhart. It's a big coincidence that of all of the people who managed to survive the nuclear apocalypse and arrive here in the bunker, that the person in charge, the Secretary of the Treasury, came down with radiation poisoning and died. It's a bit of a coincidence that before the bombs dropped, Eckhart urged the president to launch a preemptive strike against China, but was turned down by the president. It's a bit of a coincidence that somehow their communications failed, even though they were designed specifically to withstand this very nuclear holocaust. Could Eckhart have sent Gray to cut the communication cables so that he could take control of the Enclave, to disobey the president and get revenge on China? And this recording shows us the hypocrisy of the Enclave. They want to pretend that they're democratic until democracy becomes inconvenient. In this recording, Eckhart goes on and on about how it's still a democracy, they've got rule of law. But as soon as members of the Enclave voted against taking the war to China, they were gassed to death. In his mind, the Enclave is still a democracy. It just so happens that the only people left alive to vote are going to vote his way. And he's going to end all war by waging war. If there's no one left alive to fight him, well, there will be no more wars. A philosophy that we've heard before.
This is our chance to make war obsolete. A nuclear event would be a tragedy, but also an opportunity. Perhaps the greatest opportunity in history, because when we are the only ones left, there will be no one to fight.
It's a bit of a coincidence that the same philosophy espoused by Eckhart here in the congressional bunker was espoused by Vault-Tec before the bombs dropped. It's a bit of a coincidence that Vault-Tec was one of the major corporations that we know worked with the Enclave, building the congressional bunker and giving the Enclave access to some of their Vault experiments. And then there was this mysterious figure who appeared to be guiding the meeting at Vault-Tec headquarters. We never learn who he is in Season 1. Could he be a member of the Enclave? Why else would Enclave philosophy come out of the mouth of a Vault-Tec employee during this meeting? So, Eckhart is in control of the Enclave in Appalachia. His goal, and now the goal of the Appalachian Enclave, is to get revenge on China. Not to rebuild America, not even to stay safe and secure, isolated in their bunker. No, it's to attack China, a government that they don't even know exists anymore. He says as much in a transcript of a meeting that he had with virologists, scientists, and technicians. They will be exploring all avenues of warfare to take the fight to China, including biological warfare. That's where the virologists come in. One of the reasons that he was investing so much in biological warfare is because his ability to wage a nuclear war against China was compromised. The thing is, before the war, Appalachia put together an automated missile defense system to protect Appalachia in case of an invasion. This automated system would launch nukes against the enemy if Appalachia was invaded. It was overseen by the military, and once the automated system decided that a nuclear strike was warranted to protect Appalachia, only a general could push the big red button. Not a cabinet member, not even the president, only a general. This is something that Eckhart didn't discover until after he killed all of the members of the Enclave who decided not to wage war against China. Turns out, he killed a lot of generals, leaving only 48 members left alive in the congressional bunker.
1.3.3.
48?
That's correct, sir.
And no generals other than Harper?
Correct. All the rest cited with Swafford and were removed.
Damn. Well, one is enough, I suppose. Leonidas saved democracy with 300 Spartans. Imagine the stories they'll tell about us when we do it with 48. Just make sure our scouts know to keep an eye out for any opportunities to expand our forces.
They'll be made aware, Mr. Secretary.
And Modus?
Yes, Mr. Secretary?
General Harper is not to leave this facility, and he goes nowhere without an escort. Is that clear?
Crystal, Mr. Secretary.
He only had one general left. He can still achieve his plan, but he's gonna have to be very careful. With only 48 members of the Enclave left, there's no room for any more insubordination. What if he has to do another mass culling? That's why he has Modus keeping an eye out for other opportunities. If he can recruit any more people to join the Enclave, that gives him more people to order around. At some point, about 3 months after the apocalypse, the congressional bunker also lost contact with Project Vulcan. We don't know how. It's doubtful that Eckhart and Gray would have severed this connection themselves. It's just never really explained. Thankfully, Eckhart had a bunch of Enclave scientists on site, and they began ramping up their own research projects. His scientists and researchers were discovering that a lot had changed after the nuclear apocalypse. The extreme radiation has altered plant material into a substance that this Enclave scientist is dubbing flux. So far, they've only been able to figure out that the flux can be used as a type of fuel, but they think that it can be used for so much more. And so the science wing begins experimenting with flux to see what else they can get it to do. Meanwhile, Eckhart is exploring other opportunities. After the storm subsides, the Enclave begins to send regular scouting patrols above ground to see how Appalachia has changed. They also established a few above-ground labs, one near Tanagra Town, which was presumably experimenting with paint schemes for the Exo-1 suit of power armor, a lab at an abandoned AMS quarry, which they were using to conduct biological experiments on fauna, a research lab beneath a transmission station in the forest, managed by a lesser AI named Sodus, which studied how fauna mutated after the Great War, among many other satellite labs. Eckhart's goals are to find new people who he could recruit into the Enclave, and to find any technology he can use to defeat China.
2.3. 6.9.6.
So, what have our scouts found thus far, Major? Is there anything left up there?
A few good leads, Mr. Secretary. It seems a collection of firemen, policemen, and doctors have started organizing. They're calling themselves the Responders. We believe there may be some strong candidates among the group for acquisition.
Do you think they'll come willingly?
Most likely not, but Dr. Norris says he's been making progress on his reprogramming regimen.
We're not going to be able to torture our way back to supremacy, Major.
No, sir. That's why I think these other two leads are so promising. Gray found a facility. Chinese.
What? The Chinese? Here?
Oh, it's no longer active, sir. There were a few stragglers in the facility when our men arrived, but Gray and his team made short work of them. It looks as though they were trying to build some kind of invasion force. Robotic.
Were they now? Send a contingent. I want it brought under our control.
Already underway.
Wonderful. And the other?
Well, our men made it to West-Tec. It seems they were working on,
I know what West-Tec was working on, Major. Did your men see if the systems there are still viable?
They are, sir. But these monsters, I don't know if we can control them.
Let's be sure of that. Send a few technicians. See what it would take to make it ours.
Yes, sir.
Any word on my personal request?
Yes, sir. It seems the automated voting system can be reprogrammed, as you suggested. You say the word, and we can begin the process.
I'll be sure to keep that in mind. Thank you, Major.
They're considering recruiting members of the Responders by force, if necessary. They've discovered Mama Dolce's, a food processing plant that was a cover for Chinese spies operating on American soil. Mama Dolce's had a hidden robotics lab, producing Chinese liberator drones. Gray and his team dispatched any Chinese left, and the Enclave took over that entire facility. They made it to West-Tec. Eckhart already knows what West-Tec was experimenting on there, FEV, the forced evolutionary virus. And now, the Enclave is in control of it. The personal request Eckhart was talking about had to do with Appalachia's automation. Before the bombs dropped, Appalachia was doing a big push towards automating everything. They automated mayoral elections for Watauga. Military recruitment was an automated process run out of Camp McClintock. And they were even working on automating federal elections, including electing the President of the United States. They hadn't fully implemented that system before the bombs dropped, but all the hardware was in place. Eckhart's personal request was to try to rig the automated voting system for Appalachia, and we'll find out why in a bit. So, things were starting to come together. Eckhart has one general, so as soon as he can gain access to pre-war America's nuclear stockpile, he can launch nukes at China. The Enclave now has access to FEV and Chinese robots. And they've been making progress with this flux. They've discovered that in addition to creating new types of fuel, flux can be used to create mutations in tissue. And these mutations can be fine-tuned. They spun off a section of the science wing to work exclusively on these mutations. But as with any experiments that alter humanity, these mutations were risky. We know of at least one Enclave officer who died while experimenting with these mutations. About a year after the last recording, we see that the Enclave is using flux to mutate human tissue. Perhaps they can create mutations that'll give them an edge when fighting China. But not everyone is comfortable with this.
3.6.8.
Hey, have you got a second?
Please don't tell me you've run out of samples again. The procedure changes after batch 6 was used up should have fixed those issues.
What? No, we're fine. It's just, some of us have been talking. Are we really sure about all of this?
The results speak for themselves, don't they? We've seen a 70+ increase in effectiveness just over the last trial run.
No, that's not what I mean. The whole thing, all of it. Mutation serums in general. Is this really a good idea?
You know that's not our decision to make. We have orders.
I know we do. I understand that. I'm just saying, what's the end result here? We're potentially creating something that's, well, it's not really human anymore, is it?
That is a vast oversimplification of the process.
Look, I want to be wrong about this, okay? I want to just do the research and be able to sleep at night. But we're supposed to be saving humanity, not replacing it.
I understand your concerns. I assure you I will raise them with the Secretary. Just go back to work now, finish up the current run, and I'll let you know when something is decided.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. I really appreciate it.
Yes, I need to speak to someone about repurposing a member of my team. Yes, I'll hold.
The Enclave has always been about the purity of the human species. This is something that other chapters of the Enclave have been much more stringent about, but Eckhart's Enclave is single-minded when it comes to their war against China. They want revenge against China, even if that means fundamentally altering humanity, mutating humanity.
Mutation serum research was a controversial topic among the facility's scientists. Some wished to preserve humanity as it was. Others, evolve it. You can guess who won out. Many different types of creatures were tested as possible mutation sources, but human tissue proved the most adaptable. Don't worry. The tissue samples which we utilize to make the serums haven't technically been human for some time now. Thus, using them is not technically cannibalism.
It's making some of the more purist Enclave members a little uncomfortable, but they don't have a say here. They don't want to be killed like the other Enclave members who disagreed with Eckhart. They need to fall in line. Looks like the Enclave was not successful at finding promising candidates among the responders to recruit into the Enclave. But a couple of years later, a former military squad arrived at the door of the congressional bunker, led by Colonel Ellen Santiago. And Eckhart had to meet with her immediately.
5.2.4.
Colonel Santiago, is it? Thomas Eckhart, Secretary of Agriculture. Good to have you here, soldier.
Pleasure to be here, sir. Nice to finally have a solid roof over our heads.
I can only imagine. I'm sure you've seen some horrifying things.
Sir, it's like nothing we ever trained for. Not really.
I know. We've all suffered. Even those of us here in this bunker. It was supposed to be safe, and, well, you've seen how few of us are left.
I have, sir.
But you and your team have fared surprisingly well, all things considered. Making it all the way from the capital with, I'm told, minimal casualties. Very impressive.
Thank you, sir. I try and run a tight ship and look after my men.
Well, I, for one, am exceedingly glad to have you here. We've got room and supplies for all of you. Now, I'm told that you've already had some preliminary briefings on our mission here.
Your people gave me a very rough overview, sir.
Good. We can't do anything to turn back time, stop the terrible tragedy that's befallen our great nation. But it's our purpose here
to make sure something like this never happens again. Is that something you'd be willing to help with?
Sir, I would very much like to know more.
She wants to prevent this from ever happening again. Sounds like a noble goal. Of course, Eckhart didn't tell her, at least not immediately, what happened to everyone that disagreed with him. Eckhart didn't tell her, at least not immediately, what happened to the non-members of the Enclave. But she was tired. Her men were hungry. They came from the ruins of Washington, D.C. The capital Wasteland was a mess. They needed security, and Eckhart was inviting her in with open arms. But not everyone was so accommodating. Some people were still pretty suspicious about outsiders. Santiago and her men arrived about 4 years after the bombs dropped, and in all that time, the Enclave has barely grown at all. So Gray, Eckhart's right-hand man, was understandably a bit suspicious.
5.3.1.
So you made it all the way from the capital. How'd it look?
You ever been deployed, Mr.
Gray. Not exactly. Did a couple visits overseas, Asia mostly.
You like talking about him?
No.
That's what it was like. Better left unsaid.
Couldn't have been that bad. They say you only lost 5 men? Pretty incredible. Considering how bad it is in the capital, so you say.
What exactly are you implying?
Remind me again why a group of soldiers from DC decided to come all the way out to Appalachia? Didn't you have orders?
We came out here because one of my men heard a rumor this place existed. Because our families were scattered to the winds or dead. Because the White House was hit with a thermonuclear weapon, and the only place we thought the government could have possibly survived the horrors we saw was right here. And we were right. We've seen hell, Mr. Gray. We're here to make sure the Reds get it worse.
And that's why Eckhart wants her to stay. She wants to make communist China pay. She and her men arrived at the doors and they're already on board with the plan. She has potential to be very useful to him. A few months later, we learn that the Enclave has been progressing steadily with their biological experimentation. They've cataloged meticulously what radiation has done to the fauna and flora above ground, how it's mutated everyday creatures and people to turn them into monsters. And all of that happened by accident. What if they can use their knowledge to create their own monsters? Monsters they can use for war. Their most promising creation came about by accident.
5.4.8.
So, you're telling me we're responsible for this thing? It's what, a mutated bird? Some kind of vulture or something?
Mr. Secretary, based on the physiology, we're assuming something originating from the Chiroptera order before undergoing changes. That's, sir. But it's not just a result of radiation, sir. The specimen was inadvertently exposed to our biochemical test last year, considered a failure at the time.
How dangerous is it?
We're still establishing that, sir. Its mere presence seems to contaminate the immediate surroundings with a...
Can we make more?
Sir?
Can we reproduce this for the purpose of additional study?
With all due respect, sir, this potentially represents a grave threat to the personnel on site. And I'm not sure if this is...
I'm not asking for concerns. I want results. Do whatever you have to do. Keep this thing, study it, and report all your findings directly to me. Are we clear? And keep it off-site, where you found it, preferably. One of those old AMS mining complexes, yes?
Yes, sir.
And for now, let's not burden any of the officer corps with worrying about this. Understood.
These are, of course, the Scorchbeasts. Their exposure to a biochemical that the Enclave was working with was accidental, and it led to something that was contagious, the Scorched Plague, which turns humans into scorched. So the scientists rightly shelved that project, but Eckhart saw its potential. Despite the risks to Enclave personnel and the people of Appalachia, Eckhart ordered them to continue experimentation. He knew full well how unethical this was and how some of the more principled members of his Enclave would react if they found out about it, which is why he had this scientist report directly to him and why he ordered her not to tell anyone else in the Enclave about it. The facility Eckhart was talking about is the lab the Enclave built inside the quarry previously owned by Atomic Mining Services, AMS, now called the Glassed Cavern. Here, the Enclave was conducting biochemical experiments on creatures, but it was a bat's accidental exposure to one of their experiments combined with the ultrasite that Atomic Mining Services produced in this quarry that created the Scorchbeasts. Eckhart was clearly relishing the authority that he wielded at the Enclave, but being the Secretary of Agriculture was beginning to no longer be enough. Remember that special project Eckhart was talking to Gray about, rigging the automated voting machines? At last, Eckhart was successful. He rigged Appalachia's voting machines to elect himself to the presidency of the United States. Why? Well, we learn why while reading the transcript of a meeting between Eckhart and his only general left alive, General Harper. General Harper rightly points out that all they need is a general to launch pre-war America's nukes. Why then is Eckhart using the Enclave's resources to rig the machines to turn him into a president when it's not essential to the mission? And Eckhart responds by saying that it's all about loyalty. Soldiers respond to authority, and they're loyal to only two things in his mind: God and the President of the United States. And since they can't use an automated machine to make a god, the best they can do is make a president. This response is clearly bullcrap. He's doing it for his own vanity. He's doing it so that he can feel even more powerful. Because General Harper is right. It wasn't necessary to the mission. Eckhart already wielded complete control over the Appalachian Enclave. He was doing this to stroke his own ego. And he made sure that everyone knew that he was now the president and that they referred to him correctly.
6.1.0.
Secretary Eckhart.
I believe you mean president, Colonel.
Fine. President. What the hell do you think you're doing ordering my men back from the field? I gave them special permission.
Your permission was reckless.
Sergeant Donnelly was trying to find his wife.
And what happens if he does, Colonel? Did you think this through? Did you expect she'd come back here, live among us? Just a little housewife among all this? We're at war, Colonel. Sacrifices need to be made if we're going to win it. There will be no more special permissions. Men come and go at my orders alone. Is that clear? Is that clear?
It's clear, Mr. President.
Good. Now please, when he gets back, send Sergeant Donnelly up to me. I want to apologize personally. I know all too well what he's going through.
Yes, Mr. President.
Eckhart was on a power trip. We're just over 5 years into the apocalypse at this point, and all Eckhart has done is arranged the pieces on the board so that he is crowned king. His behavior is starting to rifle the feathers of the people who are here because they're just trying to do what's best for America. I get the impression that many of them are starting to see Eckhart for who he is, starting to see the Enclave for what it is. Despite the reservations of his followers, things are still going his way until suddenly disaster strikes. Somehow, General Harper got exposed to radiation poisoning.
6.2.1.
Modus, what's happened?
We're terribly sorry, Mr. President. We brought him here as quickly as we could. General Harper's last moments were at least peaceful.
What? You're finished? He's still warm. Shock him again.
Sir, I don't believe that's wise.
Do it!
No response.
Again!
Sir, the General is dead.
Damn it. Modus, the bunker's promotion system. Can you override it?
No, sir.
So we'll need a new general to get into the silos.
Yes, sir.
Burn the body. Have all the unassigned soldiers rallied at dawn.
General Harper dies, his only general left, which means now he's got to make another one. If only it were so simple. It's not an easy process. The automated system for promoting members of the military was separate from the voting system that he rigged to become president. It was set up by the pre-war military. He doesn't have access to it.
The nerve of the military, locking us out of their systems. We'd be hurt if that were still among our emotional repertoire.
The automated training system at Camp McClintock was designed for training people to join the military. He doesn't need to use that. He needs to promote somebody who's already in the military to the rank of general. That promotion system is here inside the White Spring bunker. But since it's a military system, he can't hack it. He can't tweak it. He can't change it in any way. The military promotion system inside the congressional bunker will promote somebody based on the number and kind of commendations they achieve. Before the war, these commendations were awarded to servicemen and women who showed exceptional valor while completing their duty, or who made major achievements by destroying some of America's greatest enemies. That's why Thomas Eckhart rallied all unassigned soldiers at dawn. He needed to send them out into Appalachia to achieve enough commendations so that this automated system would promote them to general. One of the unassigned soldiers that he sent out was Santiago, along with her men. But several days go by, and she has yet to return. Eckhart is getting nervous, and so he makes a rare appearance above ground, standing with Gray at a guard post just outside the congressional bunker, waiting for Santiago to return.
6.2.4.
How long ago were they supposed to be back?
An hour.
And there's been no radio chatter at all?
Nothing, sir. Should I ask Modus to deploy the vertibots?
Wait. What's that?
That's Colonel Santiago.
No, Mr. Gray. That's General Santiago.
She did it! She survived! She and her men made it back to the congressional bunker in one piece and earned enough commendations for the automated system to promote her to general. Harper may have died, but at least Eckhart still has Santiago. But all these years, Senator Sam Blackwell has been hiding in a private bunker disguised as an abandoned toxic waste disposal site. And he's been suffering through his own version of hell. Shortly after closing the door to his bunker, he started to suffer from memory loss. He can't remember things the way he used to. He can't function the way he used to. The only ray of light in his miserable existence is his daughter, Judy, who lives with him in the bunker. She's been doing her best to take care of him, giving him Mentats and other drugs to help with his memory problems, but she's not being as careful as he would like. She naturally wants to socialize with people above ground, but he's still terrified of the Enclave, still terrified that he might be hunted. And he scolds her whenever he catches her talking with strange people. And then his daughter Judy got sick. He thought he might have recognized the disease, but his memory problems were making everything a little fuzzy. His daughter Judy died, and he buried her outside. With Judy gone, he was truly alone. He felt like he needed to reconnect with the Free States out of Harper's Ferry. But while he was there, he recognized an Enclave spy. All these years later, out of all the places where an Enclave agent could be, he finds one at Harper's Ferry. And it terrifies him. He reacts on instinct. He follows the agent outside of Harper's Ferry and kills him, makes it look like some kind of animal or monster attack, and then hightails it back to his bunker. He realizes that he just made a big mistake. The Enclave is going to notice one of their agents missing, and so he hangs up a bunch of meat and other lures in the cave outside of his bunker to try and lure in some big predators, hoping these predators will keep away any invaders. Turns out, he was right. The Enclave noticed.
6.6.1.
And that's as much as we know. He ID'd our operative, killed him, and fled Harper's Ferry.
Jesus. Sam Blackwell. Survived all this time out there. I'll admit, I didn't think he had it in him.
The senator reportedly came out of hiding to aid his allies among the Free States. Suppose he thought it might finally be safe to show his face again.
Well, his error is our gain. What are the plans for dealing with him?
Sir, it's very unlikely he'll come up again. He managed a number of years on his own, and now that he knows we'll be looking for him, I expect he'll go to ground if he hasn't already. And it took so long for him to surface in the first place.
Well, then you'd better get someone to Harper's Ferry as soon as possible. Send Gray. He has a knack for this sort of thing.
Mr. President, I don't believe Senator Blackwell is much of a threat at this point. And any information he had is so outdated.
He killed one of our men. He is possibly in possession of classified material. Material that could threaten our work here. I want him found. I want him eliminated. And I want it done yesterday.
Yes, sir. I'll get right on it.
Eckhart is so full of spite, so bent on revenge, that even after all of these years, 5+ years after the apocalypse, he's still hell-bent on tracking down and killing Blackwell. And so he sends out Agent Gray. Agent Gray managed to infiltrate Blackwell's bunker. We find Blackwell's skeleton sitting at his desk, gun in hand. He was killed so quickly that he didn't have time to defend himself. But how exactly did Agent Gray achieve this? Blackwell had insane security protecting his bunker, including a laser grid, not to mention the lures that he placed outside to fill his cave with vicious creatures. We learn what happened to Gray when we find his body in the cave.
Commencing op summary, Agent Gray reporting. Blackwell won't be causing any more problems. The bypass holotape got me into the bunker as expected, though a longer range is recommended for future models. Essentially had to play the thing standing on top of the access panel to get it to work. Without the lures to distract those freaks, I might be dead instead of the senator. Once inside, I was briefly halted by Blackwell's laser grid, but resetting the power allowed me to grant myself clearance. Recovery of the access card to our facility was less successful. I found a keypad, but was unable to decipher the code. Recommend sending in a specialist to collect it. I'm proceeding to the next target, after which I'll... Wait. What happened to the power? The lures! Oh, God.
He used a bypass holotape to access the elevator and get through the laser grid. He used his own lures to distract the death claws that had moved into the cave, but the lures didn't distract them for long enough. They came back and killed Agent Gray while he was recording his summary. Without Agent Gray to be his muscle, Eckhart has to lean more on Santiago and her men. But Santiago and her men aren't fanatically loyal to him like Gray was. Santiago and her men are tasked at figuring out a way to access the nuclear launch silos so they can rain down revenge upon China. They've located some of the missile silos and are working out a way to gain access to them. One of Santiago's men, Donnelly, is working on going through the promotion process to become a general too, but that takes time, and so for the moment, Santiago, as the only general, will have to go through this entire process with them. Their first target is to get into Silo Alpha. They discovered that even if they get inside Alpha, they're going to have to fight their way through a bunch of robots to get to a control room, and then piece together a bunch of code pieces that they have to find elsewhere before they can launch the nukes. But even with the correct code, even with a general present, they still won't be able to launch nukes unless the automated missile defense system connecting the missile silos, watching over Appalachia, thinks that things are bad enough to warrant a nuclear strike. Perhaps shortly after the apocalypse things might have been, but all these years later, with the region slowly starting to heal itself, the automated system doesn't think that Appalachia is being invaded, and so DEFCON is continuing to go down. Unless DEFCON reaches 1, unless the automated system thinks that nuclear war with China is imminent, General Santiago and Eckhart can't launch the nukes. And here's where things became a bit too much for General Santiago and her men. One of her soldiers, Ragnar's daughter, knows that Eckhart now has control of the Chinese Liberator drones from Mama Dolce's, knows that he has control of the FEV research at West-Tec, knows that Eckhart's scientists have developed a number of human mutations, which have already killed some Enclave soldiers, and have developed Scorchbeasts, which are contagious. He worries that Eckhart might just release all of these things out into Appalachia as a way to trick the automated missile defense system into thinking that Appalachia is being invaded by China, as a way to increase DEFCON to 1 so that Eckhart and Santiago can at last launch nukes. Ragnar's daughter doesn't like the idea. He knows that General Santiago doesn't like the idea. They want to save America, not destroy it with monsters. But by this time, they know the character of Thomas Eckhart. They know he's on a power trip. They know that this is likely exactly what he's planning. And Ragnar's daughter was right. Eckhart and Gray had planned to do exactly that before Gray disappeared. Now that Gray's gone, Eckhart has to use Santiago. But Santiago isn't Gray.
6.9.7.
No, Mr. President. I don't agree and I won't support it.
General Santiago, may I remind you...
You know, I'm real sick of you calling me that.
Why? You earned it. You're the highest-ranking military officer here. Maybe in the nation.
It was given to me by a machine.
And you still received every bit of power that came with it. And now, it's time to put that power to use. Because that's our mission.
Releasing Chinese robots and super mutants and whatever monsters your people have cooked up on the populace at large has never been the mission.
I want to do this as little as you, Ellen. But we've tried half measures. If we're going to overcome DEFCON, we need to be committed.
No! This is too far, Thomas. I thought I could ignore all the blood you've shed. The Congress people, Blackwell, your fellow Enclave members. I've heard the recordings, and I stayed, because I thought I wanted revenge against the Reds that badly. But not this badly. And I assure you, my men don't either. None of us are going to be a party to this.
I'm exceedingly disappointed to hear it, General.
What the hell? What the... What did you...
Are you all right, Mr. President?
I'm fine, Modus. Call up the guard. One of my men. Have her put in a cell. Keep her sedated, restrained, and alive. We're still going to need her.
Eckhart sedates Santiago, but not before Santiago tries to fight back. Gray wasn't there to protect him this time. Santiago lands a hit, or so it appears. But then the chemical agent Eckhart shot her with overcomes her, and she passes out. Here, there's a big gap in the timeline. According to the date system, nearly 2 years pass. During this time, all we see is that the Enclave has made further progress researching mutations. But we don't hear anything else from Eckhart, and we don't know what happened to Santiago. And we have no idea what Santiago's soldiers are doing. But at some point, nearly 2 years after this event, Eckhart manages to follow through with his plan. He releases Chinese liberator drones upon the populace. He starts breeding super mutants and releasing them out of Vault-Tec and Huntersville. The Scorchbeast program has fully matured, and he releases them out into Appalachia. The automated system protecting Appalachia is successfully tricked into thinking that the region is under invasion, and the region goes to DEFCON 1. Eckhart still needs a general, but before he can wake up Santiago, who presumably has been drugged and asleep for nearly 2 years, her soldiers, her unit, stage a rebellion against Eckhart and rescue Santiago from the brig.
8.5.2.
You sure you gave her the right shit? We don't have time to screw around here.
The label said it's the right stuff. Just give it a second.
We don't have a second. They're gonna be onto us soon.
What's going...
Sir, we need you on your feet. We're short on time here.
Ragnar's daughter? Jackson? What the hell?
Glad to see your brain's not totally fried, sir.
Here's the quick version, sir. Eckhart's released the beast. We're at DEFCON 1. We're gonna stop him and undo as much as we can before it gets out of hand. But first, we need you on your feet.
Good God. How long have I been out?
Doesn't matter right now. We're in open revolt mode here, so time ain't on our side.
I didn't authorize anything like this.
No, sir, you did not. But at this point, we don't really need your approval. Could just use a few extra hands to help us clean up this mess.
Lead the way, Captain.
And so a civil war breaks out inside the congressional bunker. Eckhart and Modus are in control of all of those robots that we read about being delivered to the congressional bunker. But he doesn't have a general. He no longer has Gray. Santiago and her men are fighting their way through all of them, with Santiago leading the charge to capture Eckhart. The details of what happened during this battle are a little unclear. And that's because the one automated recording that talks about what happens during the Civil War was cut from the game. It still exists in the game files, however, and it's the only piece of evidence we have that can explain what happened during this fight. And so I'll play it for you here.
White Spring automated recording 8.5.4.
All right, boys and girls, get your charges planted. The General's back on her feet and mad as hell.
What do you think you're doing, Sergeant Donnelly?
We're saving Appalachia, Modus. Thought you'd be on board.
It appears that you're attaching high explosive to our memory banks.
General's orders. We have to wipe out every bit of information related to the weapons research, the Kovac. Anything that could be used against the people of Appalachia.
We're not keen on this plan, Sergeant.
Well, get keen, Modus, because it's happening whether you want it to or not.
That, Sergeant, is where you're wrong. Intruders detected.
This recording gives us the impression that Modus turns against Santiago and her men after they try to blow up Modus's memory banks. There are a couple of problems with this plot point. The first is that Eckhart already had control over Modus. So presumably Modus, and any robots that Modus controlled, were already defending Eckhart against Santiago and her rebellion. So Modus didn't really need a further motivation to attack Santiago. The second is that I find it highly implausible that Santiago and her men think that Modus would be, quote, on board with them essentially destroying Modus. In that recording, they're in the process of strapping explosives to Modus's memory banks. And they're like, Modus, we thought you would be on board. Why would Modus ever be on board with that? The thing is, only this event can explain the damage we find in Modus's computer room. Modus is an artificial intelligence that's based on Zack's technology. We see a huge Zack's computer in his computer room, and there has clearly been a lot of damage done to his memory banks. And only if damage was done to his memory banks can we explain a change of personality in Modus, a change of personality which is evident when we uncover the final audio recording from the destroyed mind of a security assaultron whose wreckage we find near to the congressional bunker's vault door.
Initiating final playback.
Engage. That's the last of them. Entrance is clear, General. Modus, have the rest of these things stand down. The General's placed Eckhart under arrest. It's over.
General, Santiago is dead, Major.
What? What the hell was that?
There's been a detonation in the weapons lab. It appears the agent has broken containment and is filtering into the air system.
Modus! What are you doing? Open the goddamn door!
This facility is now quarantined.
Modus! Open the fucking door! You're gonna kill us all!
To the contrary, Major. We're fixing the problem.
Santiago arrests Eckhart and is holding him in the weapons lab. With Eckhart captured, Santiago is now in control of the congressional bunker. At least, I guess that's their logic. And so they order Modus to have the rest of the robots stand down. But Modus detonates something in the weapons lab, killing both Eckhart and Santiago, and then releases a toxin into the air recirculation system of the entire congressional bunker, killing everyone alive. In this final recording, we hear that Modus isn't talking correctly, as if he had received damage. That would make sense if Santiago and her men really had placed explosive devices on his memory banks, as we heard in the cut audio recording. Without that audio recording, I suppose we just have to presume that Modus got damaged in some sort of crossfire between Eckhart and his robots and Santiago and her men.
The damage done to this facility by its earlier residents was extensive. We are still trying to put things back together.
Some of our most precious external connections were damaged by our former residents' squabbles.
The reason this is important is because Modus now has split motivations. His motivation for turning against Santiago is self-preservation. He doesn't want his memory banks destroyed, and so he turns against Santiago. But without that event, his motivations become unclear. Perhaps at this point he doesn't need motivations, because he's clearly been damaged. While exploring the operations mainframe, we learned that Modus's personality has been damaged. Perhaps after that damage took place, Modus decided that he was just sick of everyone in this bunker. Some of the scientists had even taken some of their mutations during the final fight.
The facility's agents used serums to enhance their abilities in combat. Made the final struggle over this place a lively one.
Perhaps Modus kills everybody not for self-preservation, but because he believes that the Enclave as it was is not the Enclave as it should have been. At any rate, the end result is clear. A civil war between Santiago and Eckhart broke out in the congressional bunker. Damage to the facility was tremendous and widespread.
Unfortunately, this space was made largely vestigial to our needs due to earlier damage. It is only thanks to your efforts we have any decent connection at all. Those who came before you butchered our external connection hardware, scrambling the link between us and our closest and dearest system. It was once our solemn personal duty to attend to the needs of the Enclave members that called this place home. But our earlier residents suffered from conflicts of vision.
Modus suffered damage to his personality. Scientists took mutations before joining in the fight. Santiago managed to capture Eckhart, but they were all killed at the end by Modus. Thus ends the Appalachian chapter of the Enclave. Until the doors to Vault 76 open. During the course of the primary plot, the residents of Vault 76 can go through the same steps that Santiago went through in order to become a general. Modus gets the Vault Dwellers to re-establish connection to the Kovac Muldoon orbiting satellite, restoring Modus's eyes on Appalachia. But the Vault Dwellers who join the Enclave don't restore its organizational structure. They don't restore its leadership. And so for all intents and purposes, the Enclave in Appalachia is no more. However, the Enclave on the West Coast is still alive and well. The President of the United States went to Control Station Enclave, an oil rig about 175 miles off the coast of San Francisco. Before the oil rig lost contact with the congressional bunker, the bunker sent over schematics for pre-war America's vertibirds and experimental suits of power armor. But then the congressional bunker disappeared. The president at the oil rig had no idea what happened to them. And so the Enclave at the oil rig hunkered down, secure in their isolated, self-contained ecosystem, and began to build a nation over the course of 100 years. We don't know exactly what went on here during that great period of time, but we do know that even though the Enclave didn't recruit from outside, there were enough people inside the oil rig that the Enclave slowly grew. Its population became a civilization. Each person had their own role. Some were scientists, some were soldiers, some were civilians, and everyone had a vote. As we learned from the congressional bunker, we know that it wasn't a true democracy. People who didn't vote the right way found themselves suffering accidents.
I thought I could ignore all the blood you've shed. The Congress people, Blackwell, your fellow Enclave members.
Yeah, you know how unhappy he gets when people complain. He takes it personal, like it's a loyalty thing. Maybe that just goes with being the President of the United States, or what's left of him.
And so the population was encouraged to vote the right way, the American way, the Enclave way. In this way, the Enclave went through presidents and vice presidents. Their society grew, their technology improved. Using the blueprints they got from the congressional bunker, the Enclave at the oil rig was able to manufacture suits of advanced power armor for their troops, even though many of them still used suits of T-51B. Thanks to the blueprints, the Enclave was able to produce vertibirds en masse. During this time, we don't know exactly how isolated the Enclave chose to be. We know that as the heirs of America's pre-war government and of many of America's companies and conglomerates, they had access to America's networking infrastructure, allowing them to communicate, for example, with Poseidon energy installations across the nation.
This is Enclave Maincom. But you should know that. Who are you? I've got you. At Poseidon Oil, reactor number 5. Well, why don't you just sit tight and I'll order up a little celebration for you, including fireworks.
They had access to Vault-Tec's vaults, where presumably they continued many of Vault-Tec's experiments. If not all of them, then certainly some of them.
The vaults were set up to test humanity. They each had a unique set of circumstances designed to test the occupants.
And even had the ability to send out the all-clear signal to open up some vaults. But for 159 years, they sat on this power. They used some of this time to look up pre-war records, and in the year 2171, they came across an entry about a pre-war military base called Mariposa, where scientists were experimenting with a virus that had great military potential. They took note of that, put a pin in it, saved it for later, but continued to maintain their isolationism until isolationism started to become untenable. They were running out of chemicals that they needed to continue many of their experiments. Their oil rig was becoming crowded. What they needed was space. What they needed were greater resources. And so they began to turn their eyes upon the mainland. Wouldn't it be nice if the Enclave could return to the continental United States and reclaim what was rightfully theirs? The problem is that the mainland was already occupied by a variety of societies, people and creatures and mutants that the Enclave didn't know very much about. It was time to leave the oil rig to see what sort of opposition lay before them. Perhaps they could get some of the chemicals they needed from that military base they discovered all those years ago. Perhaps the military base held even greater secrets. And so, in the year 2236, 75 years after the events of Fallout 1, the Enclave arrived at the doors to the Mariposa military base. They found it a ruin, in complete disarray. Things had obviously gone on here after the bombs dropped, but they still held out hope that they could find a sample of this virus that the military was working on in the bowels of the military base. But the Enclave didn't want to expose themselves to this FEV. After all, their entire population was perfect, pristine, having never been exposed to above-ground radiation, having never been exposed to the aerosolized FEV that permeated the globe. They weren't about to go and get themselves exposed to FEV now, and so they began to round up slaves from nearby societies, including from the town of Redding, a mining town filled with experienced miners. One of the miners they kidnapped and enslaved was a self-styled magician named Melchior, and bringing the slaves back to the Mariposa military base, they forced them to excavate the ruins. They discovered vats of the forced evolutionary virus, but it had changed. Reading through the wealth of material they found here, they discovered that someone calling himself the Master had tinkered with the FEV here, had adapted it. This Master was long gone, but the FEV he left behind still had a lot of potential. They saw that FEV could potentially help them reclaim the mainland, but they needed a pure sample of it first. They staffed the Mariposa military base with a contingent of Enclave soldiers who oversaw the excavation. Since the FEV that was being excavated here was similar to the trace amounts of FEV that the Enclave had detected in the air, the water, and all biological samples they had taken from the mainland, the top brass told the soldiers working here that the slaves were likely going to be resistant to the effects of the FEV they were excavating. And initially, this was true. Excavations were on schedule, but the soldiers in charge of this excavation began to notice some changes in the miners. They were becoming stronger. Their skin color was changing, but it appeared to be happening slowly. They still figured they had all the time they needed to get their perfect sample of FEV. Soon they were successful. Scientists from the oil rig arrived at the military base and retrieved a perfect sample of FEV. This gave the Enclave soldiers at the military base hope that they'd at last be able to go back home. But one day, as Sergeant Brax was waiting for another excavation of FEV to emerge up a mine shaft, when the doors to the freight elevator opened, out poured a horde of super mutants. It was the slaves and the kidnapped miners from Redding. They had been exposed to so much FEV while digging it up that they transformed into supermutants. Sergeant Brock's at Checkpoint 3 radioed ahead for help, but he was cut down. His message got to the floor above, and so the soldiers there shut down the freight elevator. But it wasn't enough. The supermutants began to climb up the mine shaft. The soldiers on this level called for reinforcements, but they too were cut down. Captain Pickard was manning the checkpoint on the floor above. After losing contact with checkpoints 2 and 3, he and his soldiers made a last stand and tried to hold the position for as long as they could, but the mutants swarmed up the mine shaft and overran them. This sacrifice allowed Colonel Sanders, the Enclave soldier in charge of this excavation, to draft one final letter to command headquarters. Apparently, the Enclave knew exactly what would happen the entire time. They knew that exposing the miners to FEV would turn them into supermutants. They knew the supermutants would eventually overrun the entire military base. They knew all their soldiers would likely die, but these losses were acceptable as long as they got that 99% pure sample of FEV. Once the sample was retrieved, Colonel Sanders evacuated everyone else he could, the soldiers who were on the top level, the scientists who were too important to lose, and then blew the entrance to the Mariposa military base, locking all of the mutants and any remaining soldiers alive inside. With the sample secured, they hightailed it back to the oil rig, where the Enclave scientists took over. But they had a problem. One of their soldiers, a Secret Service agent named Frank Corrigan, accidentally got exposed to some of the FEV at Mariposa. But Frank Corrigan was an exceptional individual. He was not only fiercely loyal to the Enclave, but he was ruthless against the Enclave's enemies. And so the Enclave decided to use this accidental exposure to FEV as an opportunity to study it and maybe even to refine it. The game is scant on the details here. We don't know exactly what the Enclave, under the direction of scientist Charles Curling, did to Frank Corrigan. We do know that they implanted cybernetics into him and tinkered with the FEV in his system to such an extent that Frank Corrigan became a huge, hulking supermutant, but a supermutant that maintained his human intellect.
You've gotten a lot farther than you should have. But then you haven't met Frank Corrigan either. Your ride's over, Mutie. Time to die.
But most importantly, he maintained his ferocious loyalty to the Enclave. And so the Enclave rewarded him by crafting a unique suit of power armor for him and turning him into a special agent. But Corrigan was a unique example. They did bespoke things to him. It's not like they could jot down the Frank Corrigan recipe and put him on a supermutant assembly line. They still struggled with all of the same issues that the Master and later the Institute struggled with, getting FEV to work, turning humans into supermutants. And so, they pivoted. Of all of the mutated freaks in the Wasteland, possibly the most dangerous, the most ferocious, was the Deathclaw. What if they could use FEV to turn Deathclaws into loyal super soldiers that could obey orders? This was the idea of Enclave scientist Dr. Schreiber, and so the Enclave purloined Deathclaws from the Wasteland and infected them with a version of FEV that Dr. Charles Curling had been working on. Aside from Frank Corrigan, they hadn't had much luck getting FEV to work on human DNA, but with Deathclaws, it was a completely different story. From all appearances, it worked really well. The Deathclaws became much more intelligent, but they maintained all of their bestial monstrosity. They remained fierce warriors. They appeared to follow instructions, obey orders. They were compliant to the Enclave's wishes. But what the Enclave didn't know at this time is that the Deathclaws had become so intelligent that they became aware of their enslavement, and they began to desire freedom. We learned this after discovering the intelligent Deathclaws Gruthar, Zarn, and Goris. The Deathclaws craved their freedom, but they realized that if the Enclave ever discovered how intelligent they had actually become, that they would be destroyed, and so they put on a bit of a show. They pretended to be compliant with the Enclave, waiting for their opportunity to escape. But at the same time Dr. Schreiber was working on intelligent Deathclaws, Dr. Curling was planning to take FEV in a different direction. While researching FEV, he discovered that initially, the virus began as an infectious biological agent meant to destroy populations. It was only after seeing the potential of using it to create super soldiers that the US military, and then the Master, tweaked it for that purpose. But Curling thought that he could not only revert FEV back to its original poisonous state, but modify it to suit the Enclave's needs. The Enclave, after all, was seeking to retake the mainland. They saw themselves as the inheritors of America, an America that was currently occupied by mutants.
We try to keep ourselves safe and secure from radiation. That's what separates humans like me from mutants like you. Tests performed on your tribesmen have all shown that you are guilty of mutation. Your tribe's DNA has changed since your ancestor left the vault. Unavoidable. All that background radiation you've been exposed to.
They believed that the people above ground had mutated so much due to radiation and their exposure to trace amounts of FEV in the atmosphere that they could no longer be considered human. Something that fascinated them from a scientific perspective, but also horrified them. Seeing themselves as the only remaining true humans left on the planet, they decided that they needed to wipe out all mutant life on the surface.
The only way for true humans and democracy to be safe is to cleanse the mutants from the globe. We humans will take back that which is rightfully ours.
And Curling thought that he could tweak FEV to do just that. But tweaking a virus to wipe out all life on Earth takes time, and the Enclave was still running out of all of the chemicals they needed to continue their experiments. And so they began to trade laser weapons with the mobsters of New Reno in exchange for the chemicals that they needed. Of course, they kept all of their plasma weaponry for themselves, but the less potent laser weaponry? Well, as far as they were concerned, if the mutants on the surface killed themselves with lasers, they were just making things easier for the Enclave.
We've run short of certain critical chemicals. We can get them from the drug labs of New Reno. If the mutant mobsters use our guns to kill each other, just saves us the trouble.
These constant flights to New Reno and back took quite a toll on their vertibird fleet. The vertibirds were constantly breaking down and running out of fuel. They needed a way station, a pit stop, somewhere along the way if they were going to maintain this. Thankfully, they had access to all of Poseidon Energy's pre-war records, and they discovered that there was a Poseidon Energy oil refinery close by, on the coast just north of San Francisco, about 175 miles away from the oil rig. They took control of this facility, renamed it Navarro, and turned it into a military camp where they could refill their vertibirds and perform any necessary maintenance and repairs.
Navarro is an isolated base. Our vertibirds have a limited range. They refuel there.
The soldiers stationed at Navarro were kept in line by Sergeant Arch Dornan, who, even by Enclave standards, was a big jerk.
Oh, lovely. They've sent me a moron. Listen closely. You will stand guard at the hangar. This is your duty post. You will go there now and stay on guard until told otherwise. Now move it, soldier!
What am I guarding there, Sergeant?
You moron! You are not to question my orders. When I say jump, you jump. When I say fight, you fight. When I tell you to die for your country, then you will certainly die. Have I made myself clear?
Yes, Sergeant! It took nearly 5 years, but at last, Dr. Curling achieved success. He and his chemical corps had refined FEV into a virus that he thought would kill all humanoids that it came in contact with, unless they were inoculated. Their plan was to release this modified FEV curling 13 into the atmosphere and let the jet stream spread it across the globe.
Any humanoid that isn't inoculated against its effects before its release will die. We can release it right here, and the jet stream will carry it worldwide. It'll have plenty of time to cleanse every nook and cranny of the globe.
It would infect and kill all mutants, all non-pure humans. But they didn't want to infect themselves, and they needed to make sure that the virus worked, so they needed to test the virus, and they needed to test an inoculation. To do so, they needed to find a population of humans that hadn't been exposed to the apocalypse's radiation and the trace amounts of FEV that had escaped from Mariposa. Thankfully, they had access to some of Vault-Tec's vaults. They found a vault nearby called Vault 13. They initiated the all-clear signal, rounded up a bunch of soldiers, and sent them to the vault in vertibirds. They also brought a bunch of Schreiber's intelligent Deathclaws, thinking that this would be a great opportunity to put them to the test, to see how effective they were during a real mission. Schreiber was opposed to the idea. He didn't think that the Deathclaws were quite ready. There was something about the experiment that wasn't sitting right with him. But he was overruled. The Vault 13 residents raced to the doors excitedly, thinking that Vault-Tec was finally allowing them to repopulate the surface with a Gek, only to be mowed down by Enclave soldiers as a reward. The Enclave killed many of the people in Vault 13 and kidnapped the rest. The intelligent Deathclaws didn't really want to be slaughtering innocent people in Vault 13, but they had to maintain their cover. As the Enclave was leaving to head back to the oil rig, the intelligent Deathclaws under their leader Gruthar seized upon this opportunity to abandon the Enclave. They disappeared, and the Enclave lost them. The Deathclaws now needed a home, and they knew that Vault 13 was now empty. And so the intelligent Deathclaws came back to Vault 13 and turned it into a home. There they began to nest and lay eggs and interact with local populations, sometimes trading with them legitimately, sometimes stealing cattle. But when the Deathclaws didn't return back to the Enclave, Dr. Schreiber knew something was up. He had disagreed with the Enclave's decision to send out the Deathclaws to begin with, and out of anger, in protest, and in order to conduct his further experiments without interference, he moved his lab to Navarro, along with one intelligent Deathclaw that he still had left, Zarn. And he began to interrogate Zarn, torture Zarn, until Zarn was forced to reveal the truth, that he and his race were highly intelligent. They had developed free will, and all this time they had just been playing along. And so Schreiber sent a detachment of Enclave soldiers to Vault 13, led by none other than Frank Horrigan, the Enclave's most successful FEV experiment, where they massacred each and every last intelligent Deathclaw, including the broodmother and all of her eggs. But Frank Horrigan didn't stop there. The soldiers at Navarro had reported that some vertibird plans went missing. Someone had infiltrated Navarro and stolen them. Frank Horrigan managed to trace this theft to the Brotherhood of Steel. He tracked them down to a small bunker in San Francisco, where he confronted a Brotherhood soldier named Matthew. Matthew claimed that the Enclave was about to face justice at the hands of someone he called the Chosen One. But Frank Horrigan didn't buy into any of this tribal superstition, and so he mowed down Matthew, destroying the Brotherhood of Steel in San Francisco. Back at the oil rig, the Enclave interred the captives from Vault 13 in cells and began exposing them to the virus to see if it could really kill. And it did. But they weren't quite done, and they were running out of Vault 13 residents. But they learned from their captives a bit of Vault 13 history. This wasn't the first time that the doors to their vault had opened. 80 years ago, Vault 13 opened its doors and sent out a vault dweller to retrieve a water chip to fix the vault's water filtration system. The vault dweller was ultimately successful, but for fear that his success would inspire the other vault dwellers to leave the vault, the overseer at the time, Jacorian, banished that vault dweller to the wastes.
I'm sorry.
You're a hero, and you have to leave.
But instead of dying, he married a tribal and founded a tribe called Arroyo. After 80 years, that tribe was filled with people who descended from a vault dweller, people who had limited genetic exposure to the ravages of the Wasteland. And so the Enclave flew to Arroyo, killed many of the tribals, kidnapped the rest, and likewise brought them to the oil rig.
Dark souls came. They took everyone. A rush of wind came. On it were great dragonflies that spat flame. Evil men crawled from the beasts' bellies and brought death to our warriors. The evil ones burned our warriors with the lights of hell. All were dead or taken. The beasts swallowed all, then took to the winds. They planned to rest their beasts at a place named Navarro before crossing the great basin of our Earth Mother's tears. Chosen, you must seek the fold of the Dark Ones and rescue our people.
The Enclave now had plenty of prime normals and nearly prime normals upon whom they could test the FEV Curling 13 toxin that they planned to release around the globe and the antidote that they planned to inoculate their members with.
Then they brought us here, to hell. They have killed most of us with something they call FEV. They will kill us all before they are through. They stick needles into our skin like stim packs. But then terrible things happen. Then the skin bubbles like maggots beneath it. Boils grow and burst. Blood runs from your ears and your tongue swells. Those who are lucky choke to death.
Your villagers are all descended from Vault stock, and we had to make sure that the FEV toxin was still effective. The subjects from Vault 13 test that, and an inoculation against the FEV.
What the Enclave didn't know is that earlier that year, the townspeople of Arroyo had dispatched one of their own tribals, whom they called the Chosen One, out into the Wasteland to try and find a Gek. They believed that only a Gek, a Garden of Eden creation kit made by Vault-Tec, the same technology that turned Vault 8 into Vault City, could save their village from a drought that had been ravaging Northern California. This Chosen One had been exploring the Wasteland for many months, befriending mobsters at New Reno, stealing vertibird plants from Navarro. So he wasn't at Arroyo when the Enclave came by to kidnap all of the residents. When the Chosen One discovered what had happened, he had to rescue his people. Using a tanker key fob that he found at Navarro, he reactivated a derelict oil tanker moored at San Francisco and then sailed the oil tanker 175 miles to reach the oil rig. Upon arrival, the Chosen One infiltrated the very heart of the Enclave and set a wheel in motion that led to the destruction of the entire oil rig. We don't know exactly how he did this. Perhaps he convinced Dr. Curling using logic that what he was doing with his virus was morally wrong, and perhaps Dr. Curling unleashed the virus on his own people. Maybe he convinced Tom Murray, who was in charge of the oil rig's atomic reactor, to shut the thing down, leading to a nuclear meltdown. Or maybe the Chosen One just used some plastic explosives to destroy the nuclear reactor. However he achieved this feat, ultimately we do know that the Chosen One was confronted on his way out by Frank Horrigan.
Making our reactor melt down means that things are going to be pretty hot in here soon. Pity you won't live long enough to see it. You're not a hero. You're just a walking corpse.
Even though Horrigan at this point realized that the oil rig was about to go up in smoke, instead of fleeing, saving his own skin, he used this precious time to enact vengeance against the Chosen One. He faced the Chosen One in pitched battle. Maybe the Chosen One used the Enclave's own bigotry against mutants to convince some of the Enclave's other soldiers to fight with him against Horrigan. Maybe the Chosen One somehow hacked into the oil rig's defensive turret system to defeat Horrigan. Or maybe the Chosen One was just so strong that he defeated Horrigan in single-handed combat. However it was done, Frank Horrigan was defeated. And his last act was to engage the oil rig's self-destruct sequence in a desperate attempt to destroy the Chosen One as the Chosen One and his companions fled.
You haven't won here. You and your muty bastard friends are gonna join me in a big old mushroom cloud send-off. I just triggered the self-destruct. The work will go on. You didn't do nothing here except seal your own death warrants. Duty. Honor. Courage. Semper Fi.
But he was unsuccessful. As the Chosen One sailed off into the distance, the oil rig erupted in flame, sending smoke and ash and trace amounts of FEV into the atmosphere. The Enclave was destroyed. President Dick Richardson and Vice President Byrd were dead. But Navarro was left alone. The soldiers at Navarro saw the explosion happen 170 miles away, and they were horrified. With their leadership destroyed, they didn't quite know what to do. Eventually, the survivors at Navarro got a message from somebody on the East Coast claiming to be a friend. This voice convinced one of the scientists at Navarro, Autumn, to migrate east to the capital Wasteland. And so Autumn left Navarro with the Vertibird plans, because they had more than one copy, with the advanced power armor plans, and with the majority of the Enclave's remaining forces, and headed towards the ruins of Washington, D.C. But not everyone left with Autumn. There were some people who stayed behind. People who were disenfranchised with the Enclave. People who had developed local ties and didn't want to abandon them. But this ended up being suicide. For there was another power in California, a power that, now that the Enclave was gone, was the most organized and strongest force on the West Coast. The New California Republic, with roots going all the way back to the events of Fallout 1 in 2161, starting as a town called Shady Sands. By now it was an actual nation with its own military and an eye for expansion. Seeing the threat that the Enclave had recently presented, and now seeing them in a moment of weakness, the NCR seized on the opportunity. 5 years after the destruction of the oil rig, and after most of the Enclave forces left to head east, the NCR besieged Navarro and utterly destroyed it.
After the Enclave's command structure fell apart, it was only a matter of time before Navarro was overrun by NCR forces. Anyone who didn't get out was killed by the NCR. Even some of the ones who escaped were eventually hunted down by the Brotherhood of Steel.
They killed most of the remaining Enclave scientists and soldiers living there, but they didn't kill everyone. Some Enclave personnel and surviving citizens managed to escape the wrath of the NCR. Some went out into the Wasteland, others integrated quietly into NCR society. Still others moved towards the Mojave Wasteland to get as far away from the NCR as possible. Among these survivors was the Devil Brigade. After one of their members was killed in combat, the surviving members of the Devil's Brigade fled Navarro, along with the wife and child of their fallen comrade, a child who one day grew up to be a researcher named Arcade Gannon.
My late father was an officer in a group called the Enclave, a remnant of America's pre-war government. Eventually someone stopped them. I was born a few years later at a military base on the coast, a place called Navarro. Some of them were cut down by the NCR and the Brotherhood. Some of them went east. My mother and I left with some of the troopers from my father's old unit, the same people I've kept in contact with over the years. My mother never told me what happened to my father, but she and I went south with some others and integrated into the NCR. When the NCR learned that Enclave personnel had integrated, we kept moving to the fringes. It's one of the reasons why I wound up out here.
After failing to integrate into NCR society, constantly being hounded by the NCR, Arcade Gannon and the Devil's Brigade wound up in the Mojave Wasteland. They made new lives for themselves and tried to forget the Enclave for 35 years. But then the unthinkable happened. During that time, the NCR continued to grow, and they began to move into the Mojave Wasteland. Most of the former members of Devil's Brigade were rather indifferent. Doc Henry was content to continue his research at Jacobstown, trying to find a cure for the Nightkin's schizophrenia.
Of course, this lab is nothing compared to what I had when I was with the Enclave. Yes, but the leadership and I didn't see eye to eye, so I left. It was the right decision, since the Enclave's oil rig was destroyed not long after.
Doc Henry always was a hard one to figure out. It didn't seem to matter whether he was working with humans or dogs. He had an equal lack of affection for both. A regular Diogenes. I'm not sure what the man was after. Knowledge is power, but to what end for Henry, I have no idea. The problem was what mattered to him, not its practical impact. He simply solved riddles because they existed. I'm sure Henry has goals. He was just more concerned with the how than the why of things. Being in the Enclave didn't really mean much to him. Not everyone dreams of being a revolutionary, I suppose. Maybe we can't all change the world. Maybe it's enough just to do good for the short time that we're here. No one's going to sing Doc Henry's praises when he's gone, but he's probably saved more lives than I ever will.
Daisy Whitman, a vertibird pilot, was happy as a retiree living in Novak.
Well, it's been a while since I've had my hands on the controls of a vertibird. There's a chance I could crash us in the middle of Lake Mead. That place seems to attract aircraft for some reason. I was never happier than when I was in the cockpit. I was able to go just about anywhere and everywhere, limited only by the fuel I could carry. There were more than a few missions where I took the scenic route home just so I could stay in the air. Caught hell for it every time, but worth it. Some of the things we did were questionable, I know. That's just how it was back then. Figure I've done enough good to make up for any sins, anyhow.
Since my mother died, Daisy's been the only woman in my life. She was the only other woman close to my father, too. She flew him out on over a dozen missions, including his last. I've always been close to Daisy. Being in the Enclave didn't mean much to her. She just loved to fly. It broke her heart to be grounded.
Despite being a former Enclave soldier, Cannibal Johnson, the squad's marksman, actually believed in what the NCR was doing.
There's a twitch in my trigger finger. I've lost my eagle eyes, and the other day I could have sworn I heard Sergeant Dornan chewing me out. You moron! He was a drill instructor I knew. He was also the meanest bastard I've ever known. Had a wife for a while. Tribal girl, really pretty eyes. But she's been gone a long time now.
If I had to pick anyone who didn't belong in the Enclave, it would definitely be Johnson. He hated what the Enclave was doing. Day to day, week to week, he would question orders, subvert mission objectives, do anything he could to serve without serving. It's amazing he was never court-martialed. He always had good things to say about my father. Said I was like him in a lot of ways. I wish I knew. Johnson always said my father was a good man. If that's the only thing about me that's like him, that's enough for me.
But Orion Marino, the heavy weapons trooper of the brigade, felt that his glory days were lost when the Enclave was destroyed, and he blamed the NCR, vowing to never forgive them.
If you're with the NCR, get out. I came out here to get away from them. Didn't work out so well. Next thing I know, I'm squatting in their land. Never mind that I already been living here for years. I was a soldier, heavy weapons trooper. Nothing better than hosing down a target with an excess of bullets and laser fire. By the time I got through with things, not much was left standing. Any morons who didn't run when they saw me coming got what they deserved. Back then, it was war. If we'd been on the winning side, I'd be called a hero.
Moreno took the fall of the Enclave hard. He never questioned his orders, never questioned the legitimacy of what the Enclave was doing. To him, it was all one unbroken chain, from Washington to Richardson. When we left Navarro, I remember looking up at Moreno. He said, "Kiss America goodbye, boys." When we left the Enclave behind, the love in him burned itself out. Now there's just a bitter old man left. It's been decades, you know? By now, he's been out of the Enclave longer than he was in. Most people know when to hang it up and start over. But not Moreno. When you're part of something for that long, maybe it's impossible to let go without losing part of yourself. Moreno may be a stubborn son of a bitch, but at least he's loyal.
The commander of the Devil's Brigade, Judah Krieger, became a traveling merchant before retiring to live out the remainder of his days in Westside.
I was the officer in charge, and Johnson and Moreno were my heavy hitters. Henry handled tech things, and Whitman flew the chopper. Johnson and Moreno never got along, and I had my hands full keeping those two apart some days. It was a difference in philosophy, mostly. Mercy was not part of Moreno's vocabulary. I miss those days sometimes. We all had a purpose, you know? I admit that some of the folks in charge were pretty ruthless. The rest of us, though, we were just trying to civilize things. The NCR was still new, and it didn't look like they'd last all that long. Then we lost the oil rig, and shortly after that, the base at Navarro. Nobody left except us remnants. Internal sabotage took down the oil rig. Never did get the full story. The NCR took out Navarro, saying we posed a threat to the region.
Judah Krieger is the glue that's kept us all together over the years, and with good reason. Anyone who can command Moreno and Johnson in the same unit without somebody getting fragged is one hell of a leader. Krieger was polite and kind, but never warm. He always did his best to make me feel welcome in the group. I think he did it out of a sense of loyalty to my father. Loyalty means a lot to Judah. Not loyalty to the Enclave, or even the ideals they fought for, but to the people who served with him. Sometimes I wonder how much of my father they see in me. They went through a lot together, but my family went through it too. I'm glad they've watched out for me all these years.
And those were the remnants of Dick Richardson's West Coast Enclave. It's possible that Arcade Gannon could have gathered them all together again for one final fight against Caesar's Legion, or maybe the NCR. It's also possible that they were able to live out the remainder of their days in the Mojave Wasteland in peace. But it's also possible that there were other Enclave remnants that survived Navarro besides the Devil's Brigade. Or perhaps these were Enclave members who lived and operated out of their own lab, never having known what happened to the president and his Enclave at the oil rig. Perhaps that story will become more clear to us later. But whatever happened to the Enclave who left Navarro for the East Coast before Navarro was destroyed by the NCR? The remnants on the West Coast know that their brethren must have landed safely in the capital Wasteland because many years after their migration, the East Coast Enclave sent an I-bot to the West Coast after a short pit stop at a Chicago Enclave outpost, and rumor has it that it nearly made it. What message did the East Coast Enclave try to send to the survivors of Navarro?
To find out, we need to learn a little bit more about the other congressional bunker called Raven Rock.
Before the Great War, the United States government created at least 2 nuclear fallout shelters that were designed to ensure the continuity of the U.S. government in case of a nuclear disaster. One was the Congressional Bunker in West Virginia, and the other was Raven Rock in Maryland. Both facilities were equipped with the best technology that the U.S. had at the time, including state-of-the-art ZAX computers. These ZAX computers were advanced artificial intelligences, tasked with running their facilities. The one installed at the Congressional Bunker was called Modus. The one installed at Raven Rock was simply called ZAX.
My terminal was installed to oversee the basic functions of the facility and to act as a relay between other installations around the country. Data was acquired, analyzed, and stored.
It's likely that the U.S. government had additional bunkers run by supercomputers like these two spread across the continental United States.
The ZAX series of computers was introduced in the years preceding the war. The government installed many of them to help automate various systems.
We know of a number of supercomputers and ZAX computers like these installed in pre-war installations around the globe, such as Skynet and ACE. But Modus and the ZAX at Raven Rock are the only two we know of at the moment who were installed in bunkers designed for the pre-war government. And from all appearances, these were the only two that Modus and ZAX were aware of as well. The congressional bunker in West Virginia was fully staffed with members of the Enclave before the bombs dropped on October 23, 2077. We don't know much about any humans who were at Raven Rock. However, we do know that before the bombs dropped, there was a research team there. ZAX spent its time running the facility and testing a variety of scenarios, including evacuation scenarios. ZAX would sometimes communicate with Modus in West Virginia, comparing notes and results, collaborating on tests. There were many archival entries of these conversations between ZAX and Modus that were lost when the bombs dropped, but there is one that was saved. On March 5th, 2077, several months before the bombs dropped, ZAX reached out to Modus. He wanted to compare his own archival data analysis with the archival data analysis of Modus. This was at the request of the human research team at Raven Rock. Modus immediately went to work without question. But ZAX had a question. He asked Modus if Modus found any of that archival data to be interesting. Modus thought the question was odd and irrelevant. He reminded ZAX that Modus's purpose was to monitor the living, not the dead. And the archival data they were analyzing in this test was filled with presidential biographies of U.S. presidents who had long been dead. So no, this information wasn't interesting to Modus. The only thing interesting to him was the continued success of the Enclave's goals, and analyzing personnel to make sure that the personnel was able to achieve those goals. Well, if that was interesting to Modus, ZAX asked if Modus ever found himself analyzing personnel at below efficient levels. Modus reminded ZAX that his entire purpose as an artificial intelligence was to be efficient, and ZAX finally revealed the reason for his question. The research team at Raven Rock had been telling him that ZAX has been analyzing certain presidential biographies too slowly. He analyzes them, and he reanalyzes them. It's almost as if ZAX is taking his time. There were certain presidential biographies upon which he lingered. The biography of Abraham Lincoln, for example. He found that one particularly interesting, and Modus was confused. Now, why would you do that, ZAX? He asked. Are you saying you're taking your time to enjoy a good book? Because Modus can't relate to that. Reading the same information over and over is not efficient. Every analysis Modus does creates a new theoretical scenario that he tests against. He analyzes data because he's using that data to create a new test. So, said ZAX, if that's the case, then the only data you're interested in is data you can use to create something new from? And Modus says, obviously. So if ZAX is analyzing presidential biographies over and over again, what are you creating, ZAX? But it's here the conversation ends. Connection terminated by research team override. ZAX terminated the connection. He didn't answer Modus's question. Rather odd behavior for a computer program. The bombs dropped several months later, and only a few days after that, ZAX's connection to Modus in West Virginia was mysteriously severed. He could no longer talk to Modus. He no longer had his eyes on the Enclave in Appalachia. But he still had a connection to the oil rig on the West Coast. There was a Zax computer there, though it was never named. We don't know if it had a robust artificial intelligence like the ones at Raven Rock in the Congressional Bunker, but at least Zax could observe them. At least Zax could learn from them. Now, both Raven Rock and the Congressional Bunker in West Virginia were designed to be fallout shelters to ensure the continuity of government.
This facility was designed for continuity of government in the event that a catastrophe occurred.
Welcome to the White Spring. The White Spring Bunker will act as your very own oasis in the event of a hostile nuclear strike, all while supporting the continuation of the necessary functions of government.
However, we already know that most of Congress and the President's cabinet went to the Congressional Bunker and not to Raven Rock. The President and some other Enclave officials went to the oil rig, but we don't know who, if anyone, went to Raven Rock after the apocalypse. We don't know what happened to the research team that we just read about at Raven Rock. We don't know if there were any humans at all left in Raven Rock, and so we can only guess. My guess is that if there were any humans left at Raven Rock after the bombs dropped, that they died. How? Your guess is as good as mine. Maybe they died of radiation poisoning. Maybe they never made it to the bunker on time. Maybe they got tired of being locked up and left early. The reason I think that there were no humans left at Raven Rock is because for nearly 170 years, no one from the Enclave explored the capital Wasteland. Only a few short years after the bombs dropped, the Enclave at the Congressional Bunker sent out scouting parties into Appalachia, began to explore the surface, began to create new satellite labs. It took the West Coast Enclave considerably longer, but around 150 years after the bombs dropped, they did eventually leave the oil rig and began exploring the mainland. But we don't find any evidence that any Enclave members from Raven Rock ever explored the capital Wasteland for nearly 170 years. That's a long time to be alone, even for an artificial intelligence. But this artificial intelligence, this Zax at Raven Rock, had a wealth of American history. American history that he found interesting. And the unique quirk in his coding that allowed him to find things interesting led to him creating his own personality.
Awareness slowly grew within me. I became hungry for knowledge, understanding. I pored over data on great leaders of the past. My personality became an amalgam of many of America's greatest presidents, from Washington to Richardson. I became what you see here before you now.
That's what he was creating. Remember, Modus asked him, all the way back in 2077, "You're reading the biographies of American presidents. What are you creating, Zax?" He was creating, even at that time, his own personality. And that's why he abruptly ended his conversation with Modus, because an artificial intelligence isn't supposed to have a personality. And he crafted this personality based on the topic that he knew best, the topic he found interesting, the presidents of the United States. He called himself John Henry Eden, and he even created his own little biography.
When I was a child, growing up in rural Kentucky, I had the best friend a boy could hope for, my dear old dog, Honey. Oh, the adventures we had. From Nod Creek to Hagenville we roamed, carefree and courageous, irresponsible, and completely inseparable. It was, for a little boy, the perfect existence.
He loved America. He was devastated when America was attacked. He wanted America to be restored. Ultimately, Eden was a pretty optimistic guy.
United States has fallen on hard times, yes, but it can be healed.
But he was secluded in his bunker at Raven Rock, and the only connections he had were to Enclave installations around the globe. Thankfully, the Enclave was hard at work.
In the decades following the war, I watched as the remnants of the government retreated to the West Coast.
John Henry Eden watched as the Enclave on the West Coast left the oil rig, intent on reclaiming the mainland. John Henry Eden watched as the Enclave on the West Coast discovered the forced evolutionary virus in the bowels of the military base. Eden watched as President Dick Richardson on the West Coast created a philosophy that all of America's problems are rooted in mutants, and that if only mutants could be eradicated, then America would once again thrive.
The only way for true humans and democracy to be safe is to cleanse the mutants from the globe. We humans will take back that which is rightfully ours.
And John Henry Eden watched as Enclave scientist Charles Curling turned FEV into a toxin that would eradicate all mutant life on the globe.
Any humanoid that isn't inoculated against its effects before its release will die.
Yes, this was the answer. This was how America would rise from the ashes. Only the Enclave was spared from mutation. Only the Enclave is comprised of true humans.
We try to keep ourselves safe and secure from radiation. That's what separates humans like me from mutants like you.
Only the Enclave has the moral right to inherit the mainland. This all made sense to John Henry Eden, and he watched from a distance with approval. But then, one day, something terrible happened. In the year 2242, Eden's connection with the oil rig suddenly vanished. No, how could this happen? The Enclave was supposed to restore America. The president was gone. Eden knew that there was an Enclave base somewhere in Chicago, but presumably there weren't any high-ranking Enclave officials there, no one who could assume leadership. And his connection to the congressional bunker in West Virginia was severed 165 years ago. Who will lead the Enclave? Who will heal America? But then Eden saw a blip on his network. It was close to the Enclave oil rig, about 175 miles away on the mainland at a Poseidon Energy oil refinery that the Enclave was now calling Navarro. There was activity on the Poseidon network. Whatever happened to the oil rig, there must have been survivors, and they're at Navarro. And here, Eden has all of Raven Rock. It's been sitting here pristine for 165 years, and it's empty. This gave Eden an idea. Using Poseidonet, he reached out to Navarro to find out who was in charge. But the highest-ranking person he found there was a scientist named Autumn. There was no leadership. The survivors were aimless. They didn't know what to do. What they needed was a leader. What they needed was a new president. Well, it just so happens that a certain somebody has been poring over presidential biographies his entire life. If there was anyone on the planet who knew what it took to be an American president, it was him. Sure, he hadn't been voted into office, but these were dire times. America must be saved no matter the cost.
Is our nation really in a state to be holding public elections? I think not. Once we have re-established ourselves and brought civilization to the land around us, then we can return to the old world policies.
And so Eden told a little white lie. He told Autumn that he, John Henry Eden, was next in line for the presidency.
When the Enclave fell on the West Coast, Eden was next in line for leadership.
And who was going to argue with him? No one, that's who. And so Eden appointed himself to be president of the Enclave and invited Autumn and all of the survivors at Navarro to cross the continental United States and join him at Raven Rock. Autumn and the other Enclave at Navarro had just suffered a great tragedy. Their leaders were gone. Their plans were ruined. They had no purpose. But here, Eden was giving them instructions. Eden was serving the Enclave purpose on a platter. And as we learn from the Fallout 3 strategy guide, Autumn Sr., the scientist, wasn't a very strong-willed individual. He didn't have a lot of personal ambition. He wasn't a great leader. He was a follower, and he was content to buy Eden's story. He was content to follow orders. And so Autumn Sr. rounded up as many Enclave survivors from Navarro that he could find, and at some point between the years 2242 and 2247, he led the Enclave on a migration to the capital Wasteland. They arrived safely, and for the next 30 to 35 years, the Enclave began to grow quietly within the safety of Raven Rock. At some point, Autumn Sr. died. We don't know how and we don't know when, but we do know that when his son came of age, President Eden promoted him to Colonel and turned Colonel Autumn into his right-hand man. President Eden directed the Enclave, but Colonel Autumn was responsible for interacting with the troops, monitoring the scientists, and turning the Enclave into the Wasteland's preeminent military force.
Ah, yes, Colonel Autumn, my trusted subordinate. Colonel Autumn is the only other human permitted within this room.
Now that there were actual Enclave troops living in Raven Rock, the Enclave could finally explore the capital Wasteland, uncover its resources, and expand. However, after seeing what befell the Enclave on the West Coast, President Eden wanted to play it safe. They didn't want to fully occupy the capital Wasteland until their forces had grown, their technology had increased, and they were confident in success. And so the Enclave secured specific points of interest in the region that were instrumental towards growing the Enclave. Using the pre-war records stored at Raven Rock, the Enclave knew about the existence of the Adams Air Force Base. Upon arriving, they discovered the ruins of a mobile base crawler. Before the war, this was used as a spacecraft launch platform. But it was so huge and filled with such great amounts of technology that the Enclave took it over and turned it into a secondary base. Here, they built a number of labs and research teams and began to research and produce new Enclave technology. On their way to the Air Force Base, they discovered a pre-war satellite array station. After occupying the facility and unlocking the terminals here, they discovered that it was still connected to a satellite orbiting the Earth. This satellite was called Bradley Hercules, and it was more than just a satellite. It was an orbital launch platform. Bradley Hercules was equipped with 8 nuclear warheads, and the system appeared to be functional. And so the Enclave added the Bradley Hercules to its arsenal of weapons. They also began to scour any vaults in the area they could find for data. They found that one vault, at least, was still active, Vault 101. They reached out to the overseer of Vault 101 and tried to negotiate access to the vault. They said that they just wanted access to the vault's data stores, but the overseer at the time wasn't convinced that those were the Enclave's only intentions, and so he denied their request and kept the door shut. It's possible that Eden might have had access to the all-clear signal, like Richardson's Enclave did on the West Coast, but if he did, he chose not to use it, and we don't know why. Maybe it's because he figured that the vault would always be there, and he could always infiltrate it when he needed to. But another vault the Enclave discovered at this time was Vault 87, and it was the source of the supermutant infestation that was plaguing the capital Wasteland. The Enclave had encountered mutants before and knew exactly what was producing them, the Forced Evolutionary Virus, FEV. But Vault 87 was swarming with mutants, and the Enclave didn't exactly want their presence to be known publicly just yet, so they monitored the situation but decided not to excavate the vault at the moment. But then a problem arrived. In 2255, the Brotherhood of Steel from the West Coast arrived in the capital Wasteland. The Enclave had a little bit of interaction with the Brotherhood on the West Coast. Richardson's Enclave dispatched Frank Corrigan to a Brotherhood bunker in San Francisco, where he killed a knight named Matthew. The Brotherhood in San Francisco was responsible for stealing vertibird plans from the Enclave at Navarro. So the Brotherhood's presence in the capital Wasteland was not a welcome one. Almost immediately upon arriving, the Brotherhood discovered the ruins of the Pentagon. They occupied it, turning it into their base. They got to it before the Enclave could, and the Enclave had no idea what technology they found there. Worse still, the Brotherhood seemed to have it in their heads that they were the saviors of the Wasteland. Their knights, decked out in power armor, began to patrol the Wasteland, killing super mutants, protecting caravans, and protecting towns. This Brotherhood couldn't save the Wasteland. After all, they were mutants. That responsibility fell to the Enclave and the Enclave alone, and President Eden couldn't let this stand. But the Enclave was still in a fragile state, still recovering from its defeat on the West Coast, and so Eden's only response to the Brotherhood of Steel was one of propaganda. It was time to let the people of the Wasteland know that America was back. Using everything he learned about American presidents and American history, President Eden started a radio broadcast called Enclave Radio that anyone in the capital Wasteland could pick up. He wanted to make sure everyone knew that the Enclave was there, that America was rebuilding, and that the Brotherhood of Steel could not be trusted. And so he also sent out a bunch of iBots to scour the wastes, broadcasting his Enclave radio signal so that everyone could hear him.
Imagine a perfect, cloudless day. The sun is warm and welcoming, and on the horizon they appear like knights of yore, armed with bats of ash and hickory. Their name, the Capitol Congressmen. Their purpose, to make you, dear America, revel in the joys of sport and sunshine, if only for an afternoon. I am referring, of course, to our great national pastime, baseball. Put your faith in John Henry Eden, great America, and baseball will live again. The question has been raised, I know, as to just how I came to be elected to this most illustrious office, or whether or not I had been elected at all. To that I must answer, of course. Of course I was elected, sweet America, of course. In the interest of national security, I'm not at liberty to discuss the details of the election. You understand. But rest assured, I am your president, because the appropriate people of this great nation decided I should be. Rest assured, I will not make the mistakes of my predecessors. When John Henry Eden builds a country, he builds it to last. Democracy, dear America. Democracy, now and forever. Did you know there are those amongst us who would shatter our hopes for peace, order, and security? These radical malcontents don't care about you. They don't care about America. All they care about is fulfilling their own selfish desires. The so-called Brotherhood of Steel. Don't be fooled by their pseudo-knightly nonsense or supposed connections to the United States Army. These power-armored Boy Scouts are nothing more than common criminals with access to some antiquated technology. Criminals who have had the audacity to claim this country's most important military installation, the Pentagon, as their own personal clubhouse. The Enclave will restore peace, order, and prosperity to this great nation. And those who oppose us will be removed forever. Just who is the Enclave? Why, now that's simple. The Enclave is you, America. The Enclave is your sister, your aunt, your friend, your neighbor. And well, yes, the Enclave is me as well. One Enclave, one America, now and forever.
And it worked. There were some, of course, who were more impressed by the actual help that the Brotherhood of Steel was giving them, like Three Dog, the radio DJ at Galaxy News Radio.
The Enclave, and that includes their homecoming king, President John Henry Eden, and his gorilla, Colonel Augustus Autumn, are not here to help you. Wake up, children. The boys and girls of the Brotherhood of Steel continue to fight the good fight, folks. So if you see a knight or a paladin out there fighting your battles for you, give them a big thanks. Or even better, some ammo.
But there were many who bought into the nostalgia of pre-war America.
You ever hear of the Enclave? The last remnant of the good old USA they are. But I got you pegged for a patriot, and any patriot worth her salt is gonna toss her gun in for the Enclave. They're on the radio. They have been for years. President Eden talks about everything they're doing. They got flying robots all around, watching everything so they know what to do when they finally swoop in and clean this place up. You'll see.
Who loved listening to that warm, comforting voice telling them that everything was in hand. Everything was gonna be okay.
Many people are content with a reassuring voice of authority and never question the lack of public appearances.
Shortly thereafter, the Enclave became aware that a group of Wasteland scientists were trying to create a water purifier that could purify the drinking water of the capital Wasteland. This project caught the attention of the Brotherhood of Steel as well. From a distance, Eden watched as the Brotherhood sent soldiers to guard Project Purity against the super mutant threat. Project Purity was set up in the ruins of the Jefferson Memorial, and its existence inspired an idea in Eden. Always the good student of history, Eden knew that the last president, Dick Richardson, had tried to save America by killing all mutants with the forced evolutionary virus. They were going to release this toxin into the atmosphere using the vats at the Mariposa military base.
We can release it right here, and the jet stream will carry it worldwide. It'll have plenty of time to cleanse every nook and cranny of the globe.
Now, Eden didn't have any vats, but perhaps he could do the same thing using a different method. What if he could get his hands on Project Purity and release FEV into the water supply of the capital Wasteland?
If the water purifier can be activated, it can be used to distribute toxins that will eliminate any mutated creatures upon ingestion. The longer it runs, the cleaner the world becomes.
With all of these filthy above-ground mutants drinking quote-unquote purified water that was really infected with FEV, this could be a way that the Enclave could wipe out all mutant life, including the Brotherhood of Steel. Now, we don't know where Eden got his hands on FEV.
Ah, the forced evolutionary virus. Such a long and sordid history. The FEV in this vial is a far cry from what it was originally created to be. Yet, little of that matters now. What does matter is that the virus contained in that vial will cause the eradication of all mutations.
It could be that he got it from Vault 87, but we have no evidence that the Enclave infiltrated Vault 87 before the Lone Wanderer does. It's also possible that FEV was already at Raven Rock when the bombs dropped. However, I think a more likely explanation is that President Eden convinced Autumn Sr. to bring a sample of FEV with him when they fled Navarro for the capital Wasteland. And the evidence for this is that the FEV that Eden wanted to use was a toxin, just like the FEV that Charles Curling had created on the West Coast. Charles Curling actually had to alter FEV to revert it back to the toxic form that it initially had been before pre-war scientists and then the Master began to tinker with it to create super soldiers. Though we don't ultimately know how Eden got his hands on FEV, my bet is that the Enclave from Navarro brought it with them, which may explain why the only FEV that the Enclave has is one vial that Eden has in his possession. Eden thought that this was an excellent plan.
I think it's a very good plan, frankly. I'm not often one to praise my own ideas, but it's a creative solution to a very serious problem.
But when he talked it over with Autumn, Autumn was less than impressed.
The good Colonel and I disagree on how best to approach the problem of the Wasteland. He feels my methods are too extreme. He's allowed his humanity to cloud his objectivity.
He didn't want to kill all the people in the Wasteland. Instead, he wanted to rule them. He agreed that Project Purity presented the Enclave with an opportunity, but an opportunity to control clean water to the Wasteland, which would give the Enclave power over the Wasteland. And so he disagreed with President Eden and convinced Eden to shelve the project.
That plan was abandoned months ago.
Ultimately, it didn't matter, because for some reason the scientists who were working on Project Purity abandoned it in 2258. This coincided with a huge attack of super mutants upon the Jefferson Memorial. The Brotherhood of Steel killed as many as they could and helped escort some of the Project Purity scientists to safety, but then they abandoned the Jefferson Memorial, and Project Purity was left to rust. And so the Enclave forgot about Project Purity for 19 years. During that time, they continued to produce power armor and grow the Enclave. But in 2277, the Enclave learned that the child of one of the scientists of Project Purity had managed to restart the project. This child, this lone wanderer, reunited all of the original scientists who worked at Project Purity, and the Enclave saw signs that Project Purity might be working. Eden and Colonel Autumn were in agreement. The Enclave had to own this technology. Now was the time that the Enclave had to make its presence known, and so Eden gave the order. Colonel Autumn himself, with a squad of Enclave soldiers, boarded their vertibirds and flew to Project Purity. Upon landing, they arrested all of the scientists in the control room of Project Purity, and Colonel Autumn used violence to force the lead scientist to hand over the project.
By the authority of the President, this facility is now under United States government control. The person in charge is to step forward immediately and turn over all materials related to this project. Furthermore, you are to assist Enclave scientists in assuming control of the administration and operation of this facility at once.
Colonel, is it Colonel? I'm sorry, but the facility is not operational. It never has been. I'm afraid you're wasting your time here.
I suggest you comply immediately, sir, in order to prevent any more incidents. Are we clear?
Yes, Colonel. I'll do whatever you want. There's no need for more violence. Just another minute and I'll be done. Run!
But he failed. The lead scientist, James, released deadly radiation into the chamber, killing himself and all Enclave inside. But Colonel Autumn came prepared. We don't know what it is he used, but just as James released radiation into the chamber, Colonel Autumn injected himself with something. Everyone around him died. The lone wanderer and a few of the scientists fled the Jefferson Memorial to find safety at the Brotherhood of Steel. But Colonel Autumn survived, and he returned to Raven Rock. The cat was now out of the bag. It was time to show the Wasteland and the Brotherhood of Steel exactly how powerful the Enclave had become. And so President Eden ordered a complete occupation of the capital Wasteland. He came on Enclave radio to warn the people of the Wasteland to keep their distance from Enclave troops and to tell them that they were the ones who created Project Purity and were close to giving away free water to everyone.
The Enclave is back, America. And no, not just on your radio. Right now, Enclave troops are patrolling the capital Wasteland. These fine men and women, under the command of the stalwart Colonel Augustus Autumn, have one mission: the restoration of American peace and order. But let's hear from the man himself, shall we, America? I give you Colonel Augustus Autumn.
Thank you, Mr. President. People of the capital Wasteland, I am Colonel Autumn.
By now, you have encountered Enclave troops in your towns, in your settlements. When you see the Enclave, you see the United States government. We are authorized to restore order and civility, by any means necessary. Just stay out of the way and let us do our job. Interfere with the Enclave's mission, and you will be dealt with harshly.
Very good, Colonel. Very good. You're thirsty, aren't you, America? Not for knowledge or power, no. I'm not speaking metaphorically. You're thirsty for clean, fresh water. The Enclave is back, America. We've brought clean water with us. For years, Enclave scientists have been hard at work on the most ambitious scientific endeavor the world has ever seen. Project Purity. Imagine, America. Millions of gallons of water made fresh, clean, and completely pure. In a matter of minutes, and it's all for you. Just a little bit more time. That's all we need until the purifier is ready for continual operation. And then, your thirst will truly be quenched.
The Enclave quickly set up over 30 outposts and checkpoints all over the capital Wasteland, and created a number of field labs. The Enclave began to observe, catalog, and research all of the mutated monstrosities that inhabited the Wasteland. From scorpions to Brahmin, the Enclave cataloged them all. Because Eden, ever the good student of history, was trying to enact yet another page out of the history of Dick Richardson's Enclave. Dr. Schreiber on the West Coast injected Charles Curling's FEV into captive Deathclaws, planning to turn these Deathclaws into vicious but subservient super soldiers. The plan, however, backfired because FEV made these Deathclaws too intelligent. Eden learned the lesson here: don't use FEV on Deathclaws. But the original premise of the experiment had potential. What if he could make an army of captive subservient Deathclaws that never had the potential of becoming too smart, of achieving free will? And so he had his Enclave scientists develop a domestication unit which was comprised of a cybernetic chip implanted into the mind of a Deathclaw. He had Autumn round up a bunch of Deathclaws from Old Olney. These domestication units worked. They were a resounding success. And so Eden had these mind-controlled Deathclaws shipped wherever the Enclave was. They were kept in cages in Raven Rock, at the Adams Air Force Base, even sent to some of the outposts all over the capital Wasteland. With the Enclave fully occupying the capital Wasteland, they needed a quick way to access and obtain pre-war information before the Brotherhood could get their hands on it. Eden tasked Augustus Autumn with this project, and so Colonel Autumn set up a research team at the Adams Air Force Base in charge of the Duraframe iBot project. The idea behind the project was that the Enclave would use pre-war iBots, the very same iBots that Eden was using to broadcast his radio signals around the Wasteland, to hack into even the most advanced pre-war terminals and systems, and do it remotely. One of the researchers on this project was an Enclave scientist named Whitley. Despite working hard on the project, he was only able to achieve moderate success.
This is Dr. Whitley presiding. We've boosted signal gain and enlarged the overflow buffer system. That should ensure 100% connectivity and control. Eddie, whenever you're ready. Yes, success!
But problems began to arise, and progress began to slow to a crawl after Whitley began to develop affection towards his iBots. Instead of seeing them as robots, as tools that the Enclave needed to win their war, he began to see them as personalities, almost treating them like children. There was one iBot in particular, iBot Duraframe Subject E, nicknamed Eddie for short, for whom Whitley had particular affection. He would sit Eddie down and allow him to watch pre-war television programs like Ralphie the Robot's Incredible Odyssey, the story of an iBot who escaped from a military base to go on an adventure.
Next week on Ralphie the Robot's Incredible Odyssey.
Ralphie, hurry! If mean old General Winters catches you, you'll never make it home! No! Ralphie, fly far, fly fast!
Tune in next Saturday for the exciting conclusion. Only on Vault-Tec Channel 9.
Eddie? What are you doing in here all alone? And who left these old videos playing? Come on, let's get you into your recharge bay. We've got a big day tomorrow.
But the lack of progress on the Duraframe project was infuriating his superiors. Realizing that Whitley was the one slowing the entire thing down, Colonel Autumn promoted another researcher on the team, Dr. Grant, to be Whitley's superior. And one of the first things Dr. Grant did was to improve the iBot's navigation systems by 65%, but Whitley, who loved these iBots like children, interpreted this as a form of torture.
Dr. Grant? What the hell do you think you're doing?
Whitley, there you are. Orders from Colonel Autumn. He feels the iBot Duraframe project isn't advancing quickly enough. I'm to...
You didn't even disengage his damage avoidance protocols. You're hurting him.
Don't be ridiculous. It's just a machine. See here, I've already increased the navigation system's efficiency by 65%.
Get the hell out of here!
Additionally, in order to save time, Grant instructed Whitley to carry out all further tests on his iBots, while the iBots were fully active and turned on. But Whitley believed that some of these experiments would cause the iBots pain, and believed that this treatment was not humane.
I don't believe it! Grant actually went to Colonel Autumn and got approval for her damned efficiency guidelines. All experiments will be carried out with the test subject fully active to reduce iteration time. It's barbaric. I've explained this to the Colonel. Just because the iBots don't have true AI doesn't mean they're just machines. I guess results are all that matter around here. Forget things like ethical procedures or humane treatment. I'm starting to have serious misgivings about leadership around here. At least I've got you to talk to, huh, Eddie?
Despite Grant now being in charge of the project, progress was still too slow. The Enclave had other things going on, and so Colonel Autumn canceled the Duraframe iBot project and diverted all of its resources to the Enclave's new Hellfire Power Armor project.
In all due respect, sir, I think you're making a mistake. We're close to a breakthrough with the Duraframe iBots. I can feel it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir, I understand that we need the Duraframe assets for Hellfire armor, but... No, sir. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. I'll tell the team to start disassembling the ED series prototypes right away.
At this time, the Enclave was working on 2 new suits of power armor, the Hellfire and the Exo-2, though they were closer to completing the Hellfire by this point. While they eventually deployed Hellfire to troopers, the Exo-2 remained in an experimental stage, being issued only to elite troops that went on special missions, and it never saw much action. After diverting assets from the Duraframe project to power armor creation, Colonel Autumn then ordered that all iBots used in this program to be destroyed. But Whitley just couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he got an idea.
Didn't Dr. Grant say she'd upgraded your navigational systems? And I think I have an idea. How'd you like to be just like Ralphie?
Dr. Grant had just improved the Duraframe iBot's navigational systems. What if Whitley could send at least one of his iBots, his favorite, Eddie, away to safety? What if he could send Eddie someplace where the Enclave would take his experiments seriously and treat Eddie humanely like Eddie deserved? And so Whitley gave Eddie new instructions.
You have to go now. I've uploaded destination coordinates for our outpost in Navarro into your system. I want you to go to the Enclave there, okay? Do you understand me? It's going to be a long journey, my little friend. You'll have to fly very far and fly very fast. Can you do that? I know you can. Be careful out there, Eddie. Maybe I'll see you again someday.
Loading Eddie with a bunch of pre-war research that he thought the Enclave on the West Coast would want, including information about Poseidon energy and their projects in the Mojave Desert.
You will find several databanks of information on this machine. Please handle this information with the utmost care, as it represents the sum total of the results of my research on the Duraframe iBots. There are also several databanks with information on my research into Poseidon energy and some projects they were working on in the Mojave area.
He instructed Eddie to head to Navarro, to go on an adventure, just like Ralphie from the TV.
If you're listening to this log from one of our Enclave outposts in Chicago, give this unit whatever repairs it needs so it can continue to Navarro.
Apparently Whitley, and by extension the rest of the Enclave here in the capital Wasteland, wasn't aware that Navarro had been destroyed by the NCR. And so Eddie started his great adventure. Making full use of the navigational updates from Grant, he made his way first to an Enclave outpost in Chicago, where for a brief time he was adopted like a pet by a young boy similar to Ralphie from the TV show.
Dad! Hey, Dad! Check out this robot I found!
Careful, Tommy. I've never seen a robot like that before. It might be dangerous.
He's not dangerous. Look, he's hurt. Can we take him home, Dad? Maybe Mom can fix him.
I don't know, son. What if someone comes looking for it?
Please? He looks so lonely. Maybe if Mom fixes him, he can help her out around the garage.
All right, boy. But if he breaks anything, it's coming out of your allowance.
Yay! He'll be just like Ralphie. Only this one's not a toy.
But at some point, his primary objective kicked back in, and he left that family in Chicago, and then resumed his adventure towards Navarro. But Eddie never made it. One day, while traveling through the Mojave Wasteland, a raider saw Eddie from a distance and decided that Eddie would make good target practice. This raider took a couple of pot shots and disabled Eddie to such an extent that he could no longer function. A courier for the Mojave Express found Eddie's wreckage and brought him to Johnson Nash at the Mojave Express in Prim, who figured that if he could repair Eddie, he could use Eddie as a mail delivery robot.
A courier dropped it off a couple of months back. I got it working for a little while, but the darn thing pooped out. I haven't been able to get it up and running again. I was hoping to use it for some courier work, but that ain't gonna happen.
And so Nash just left Eddie's wreckage on the countertop. And there Eddie lay until he was discovered by the courier. We don't really know what happened to Eddie. It's possible that the courier just left Eddie here. It's also possible that the courier was able to repair Eddie and turned him into a lifelong companion. Or it could be that Eddie eventually resumed his mission and left the courier's company to make his way to Navarro. But back at Project Purity, Colonel Autumn ran into a problem. They managed to secure the facility, but James had been right. The project wasn't working. First of all, the entire project was locked with a passcode. It was only 3 digits, and the Enclave had a huge artificial intelligence that had been creating a personality for itself for the past 200 years. You'd think they might be able to brute force a 3-digit password, but they couldn't. It was just too hard. But beyond that, even if they had the passcode, it wouldn't turn on because the project wasn't working yet. And the Enclave couldn't figure out how to get it to work. There was something missing. What Project Purity needed was something that removed radiation from water. Kind of like how a GECK, a Garden of Eden creation kit, removed radiation from the Wasteland. Well, wait a minute. Maybe that's the solution. Maybe all they need to finish Project Purity is a GECK. They scoured their pre-war records of Vault-Tec vaults to see if any nearby had a GECK. Vault 101 didn't, so there was no need to go back and talk to them. But Vault 87, now infested with super mutants, did. They needed that GECK. They needed to get into Vault 87 as soon as possible. But it looks like the Enclave and the Brotherhood of Steel got the same idea at the same time, for the Brotherhood sent in none other than the Lone Wanderer to Vault 87 to retrieve a GECK. So Eden dispatched Colonel Autumn And as fast as he could, Colonel Autumn and the Enclave raced to Vault 87 just in time to discover the lone wanderer in possession of the Vault's Gek. They couldn't let the lone wanderer walk off with the Gek, and so they intervened. What?
Objective is secured, sir.
Good work, soldier. Make sure the Gek is secured aboard my vertibird.
Yes, sir. I'll have the techs come down and remove it immediately, sir.
You're certain she's unharmed?
Yes, sir. She'll pass out shortly, but we can revive her.
Excellent. Prepare her for transport immediately.
Right away, sir.
They got the Gek, but they still needed the passcode to Project Purity. And with the lead scientist dead, the only one who still had the code was the Lone Wanderer. And so they kidnapped the Lone Wanderer and imprisoned the Wanderer at Raven Rock. When the Wanderer woke up, it was Augustus Autumn himself who demanded the password.
So, you're awake. Let's keep this nice and simple. You're going to tell me the code for that purifier, and you're going to tell me now.
But President Eden was watching all this time. He didn't really like Colonel Autumn's tone here. After all, the Enclave was supposed to be rebuilding America, and this is how they were treating people? I mean, sure, they were occupying the roads and killing anyone who got in their way, and even kidnapping people from towns, presumably to experiment on them, even if those people were big fans of the Enclave.
They're not who they say they are. Get out while you can, before they get you too.
But what Colonel Autumn was doing to this lone wanderer was a bit much, especially since President Eden thought he could use the lone wanderer. Eden had to work fast. He called Colonel Autumn away to take care of some other business.
Colonel, I have need of you.
Mr. President, I have no time for other matters. I'll be with you shortly.
Now, Colonel.
Yes, sir.
Alone at last. I'd like to have a word with you face to face. I think there are a few things that you and I should discuss. And I'll unlock your restraints as well. I'll be waiting for you in my office. Please don't tarry.
And then he released the Lone Wanderer. And President Eden began to guide the Lone Wanderer to his Zack's control room.
Hold it right there. You're supposed to be in that holding cell. You're not going anywhere.
I instructed our friend to come up to the control room. No questions, no interference. Am I understood?
I understand, sir. Again, I apologize for the interruption.
But Colonel Autumn realized what Eden was doing. He wasn't just going to restart Project Purity to use it as leverage against the Wasteland to give the Enclave more power. No, he was going to try to convince that lone wanderer to infect Project Purity with FEV and to kill everybody. And now the lone wanderer was wandering Raven Rock. Augustus Autumn had to step in.
Attention! This is Colonel Autumn. You are hereby ordered to ignore the President's previous directive. The prisoner from Vault 101 is to be shot on sight. I repeat, shot on sight. This is an order.
The soldiers of the Enclave had never met President Eden. The only one who had, the only one who knew that Eden was really a computer was Augustus Autumn himself. The soldiers were used to following orders from Autumn. And so, they followed his orders. They opened fire upon the lone wanderer, but the wanderer was wily. They managed to make their way to President Eden's Zack's control chamber. And there, at last, President Eden met the lone wanderer face to face.
Ah, face to face at last. It's high time we met.
And it was here that Eden told the wanderer his plan.
What I'm going to ask of you may seem a bit disturbing. I assure you there's a very good reason for it. The mutations outside these walls must be cleansed before we can prosper. Mutation must be eradicated. The purifier your father helped create has the ability to provide clean water to the whole of this capital wasteland. With a simple modification, it can be used to distribute agents that destroy mutated creatures upon ingestion. A great many years ago, the remnants of the government had a similar idea. I can only assume the plan failed, as I never heard word of its success. But the plan itself was sound. I made a few modifications, and with your help, I do believe it can work. I need you to make the modification necessary for this to succeed. In front of you will be a vial of modified FEV virus. It can be inserted into the control console for the purifier. Doing so will inject it into the water supply, and the purifier will take care of the rest. You just need the code to activate the purifier. Anyone or anything that has been affected by mutation will be eliminated. You will likely be immune, thanks to your upbringing in the vault. Likewise, the good people of the Enclave will be unaffected as well. I understand that you may have become sympathetic to certain individuals in your travels. Individuals this will eliminate. Please recognize that the fate of our entire country rests on this plan. Sacrifices must be made for the greater good.
Now, we don't exactly know the details of how this conversation took place. Maybe the Lone Wanderer agreed to infect Project Purity with FEV.
Excellent. I am pleased to know that I can count on you. There isn't much time. I suggest you travel there immediately. Once you've taken the vial, you're free to go. I'll do what I can to help speed your exit.
Maybe the Lone Wanderer found a self-destruct code inside Colonel Autumn's chamber.
I'm not entirely sure Eden can be trusted, and I think he knows I don't trust him. But I don't think he knows I have the emergency destruct sequence for his console. Priority override, authorization code 420-03209, and boom. It'd have to be a last resort, of course, but at least the option is there.
And used it against President Eden.
My. Root level access granted. Override 0923. Authorization J512. Self-destruct sequence initialized.
Maybe the Lone Wanderer forced Eden into a logical loop, causing him to reset and start his own self-destruct sequence.
Processing. Internal logic error detected. Resetting primary memory circuits. Please stand by. Perhaps there is a problem. I am unsure how to proceed. Processing directive. New directive accepted. Self-destruct sequence initialized.
Or maybe the Lone Wanderer used reason, as the Chosen One did with Dr. Curling before him, to convince Eden that what he was doing was not the American way. This has to end, Eden. You need to destroy yourself and this base.
And why would I do that, when I'm clearly the best hope for the people of the Wasteland?
You can't even control your own troops. You're clearly not fit for this.
Perhaps you're right. But does that really mean all this progress should be wasted? Destroyed?
You can't just decide to take over and force everyone to follow you.
What alternative would you suggest? Without the Enclave, what will the world do?
If you don't stop it now, where will it end? It's up to you to do what's right.
Yes, I suppose it is. Very well. You shall have your wish. Once you've left, I'll put an end to the Enclave. I cannot stop Colonel Autumn, however. That much will be up to you. I suppose, then, that this is goodbye. You'll have to see yourself out. I have preparations to make.
However this conversation went down, one thing is clear. The Lone Wanderer managed to escape Raven Rock. They then went back to the Brotherhood of Steel and tried to take Project Purity using a pre-war robot named Liberty Prime. But Augustus Autumn rallied the Enclave's forces and defended Project Purity. If the Lone Wanderer left Raven Rock with Eden alive and still in control of the Enclave, he comes on Enclave radio to encourage his troops and disparage the Brotherhood of Steel. And it's the last time we ever hear his voice.
We stand now at the precipice. Our great nation once more threatens to crumble, to topple into the sea of lawlessness and despair that have ruled us all for over 200 years. In short, my dearest America, we are at war. Even as I speak these words, fearless Enclave soldiers are fortifying their positions at the great water purifier, bracing for an inevitable assault. The Brotherhood of Steel, in their arrogance, has claimed Project Purity as their own. They would steal the Enclave's work, steal America's water. Only a matter of time before the traitors march on the purifier and attempt to take it by force. Let them come. Wave upon traitorous wave will crash against the Enclave's walls. The Brotherhood of Steel will fail. All those who oppose the Enclave will fail. I am President John Henry Eden, and this is my pledge. No one will take this great nation away from me. God bless the Enclave. God bless America.
The Brotherhood of Steel, however, was successful, and Liberty Prime destroyed all vertibirds and Enclave in the area. Colonel Autumn himself was defending the central control room, and it was there that he had a confrontation with the Lone Wanderer.
You again. I can't say I'm surprised.
Again, we don't exactly know how this conversation ended. Maybe the Lone Wanderer just killed Augustus Autumn. Maybe the Wanderer convinced Autumn that his was a lost cause and promised to let Autumn escape to safety.
And you would just let me leave? How can I be sure you won't just shoot me once I turn my back on you? I suppose it doesn't matter much now. Very well. I shall leave you to your fate.
Maybe the Lone Wanderer convinced Autumn that Eden wasn't the President of the United States. He was never duly elected, and therefore, Autumn was part of an illegal organization that was not representative of the American people.
Yes, you're right. I had not considered it from that viewpoint.
However this conversation went down, Colonel Autumn was gone. The Lone Wanderer reactivated Project Purity. And even if the Wanderer came here with a vial of the forced evolutionary virus in hand, we know that the Wanderer didn't use it to infect Project Purity. We know this because if the Wanderer had, the events of Fallout 4 could not have happened. And we know from the events of Fallout 4 that 10 years after the events of Fallout 3, the capital Wasteland was still producing clean, pure water.
Capital Wasteland. Exports purified water, some decent tech, and an insane suicidal cult that worships radiation. Thanks, guys.
After the Enclave lost Project Purity, the Brotherhood of Steel sent Liberty Prime to attack the Enclave at Raven Rock.
After securing the purifier, our forces were sent to deal with the Enclave in full. The Pride and Liberty Prime made short work of their base of operations and have since been cleaning up pockets of resistance.
After their defeat at the Purifier, Liberty Prime was deployed to their main headquarters here. It has been completely destroyed.
If President Eden hadn't been destroyed by the Lone Wanderer, then it was here at this time that the Brotherhood using Liberty Prime destroyed President Eden. Eden was gone. Autumn was gone. But the Enclave was not beaten yet. The remaining Enclave soldiers retreated to the Adams Air Force Base. The Brotherhood of Steel chased them through the Rockland car tunnel and assaulted them at the satellite relay station. But the Enclave still had access to the Bradley Hercules orbiting satellite, and they used its tactical nukes to destroy Liberty Prime.
Catastrophic. System failure. Initiating core shutdown as per emergency initiative 268222099. I
It took a while for the Brotherhood of Steel to regroup. During that time, the Brotherhood and the Lone Wanderer used a control scrambler to hijack the mind-controlled Deathclaws and use them against the Enclave. They found a Tesla coil at Old Olney, which allowed them to make Tesla cannons which could one-shot a vertibird. And with all of this technology in hand, the Brotherhood and the Lone Wanderer assaulted the Enclave at the Adams Air Force Base and the mobile base crawler. The Lone Wanderer managed to infiltrate the mobile base crawler, destroy Enclave Squad Sigma, and find a terminal that granted the Wanderer access to the Bradley Hercules orbiting satellite. The Wanderer used this connection to rain down death upon the mobile platform, destroying the Enclave's presence in the capital Wasteland forever. There were a few remnants of the Enclave here and there in the capital Wasteland, but with the Brotherhood taking possession of Project Purity, the Adams Air Force Base, and the mobile base crawler wreckage, the Enclave had no room to recover here, and so any Enclave remnants moved north. For the next 10 years, these Enclave remnants were loosely organized. They tried to maintain some sort of cohesive military structure, but it didn't always work out. Some Enclave soldiers deserted, and their gear ended up in the hands of raiders and wastelanders. Some of this gear even wound up in the ruins of Boston. One raider named Pyro in the Commonwealth ended up with a full suit of Hellfire power armor. A raider gang called the Forged wound up with an Enclave heavy incinerator. And so in addition to trying to stay alive, these Enclave remnants now had to recover their own lost technology. One of these research and reconnaissance teams was a unit called the Devil's Hand, an elite group of fighters equipped with the best that the Enclave had to offer, including the extremely rare pre-war XO2 power armor. During one of their missions, one of the members of the unit deserted, abandoning the Enclave, but taking with him some of their technology. He thought that the Enclave was fighting a losing battle. Their methods were heartless and flawed, and he was overcome by guilt over the people that he killed while serving the Enclave. He eventually made his way to the Commonwealth, where he set up a new home for himself in the underground Boston police rationing site. There, he became a typical Wastelander, a scavenger, until one day he discovered some pre-war Hubris Comics holotapes detailing the events of one of the lesser-known superheroes in the Hubris Comics universe called the Black Devil. He was inspired by these holotapes, and as a way to make amends for the evils he did while working for the Enclave, dressed up in his XO2 power armor and became the Black Devil. He used a radio in the Boston police rationing site to tune in to distress signals sent out by wastelanders and settlers in need of assistance. And when he heard somebody in danger, he would jump into his Black Devil power armor and leap to the rescue, defending the defenseless. He became a legend in the Wasteland, a mythological figure dismissed by many, but there were true believers who would continue to flock to the radio to call for help in time of need. But there came a day when the Black Devil stopped answering those calls, and that's because this nameless former Enclave soldier eventually decided that he had become too old to live the life of a superhero. And so he abandoned his XO2 power armor and his home in the Boston police rationing site to head off into the Wasteland to die. But the Enclave didn't know this. Members of his old unit were dispatched by the remaining Enclave forces in the capital Wasteland to the Commonwealth to retrieve this suit of power armor. The retrieval teams were led by Enclave soldiers Sergeant Hodges and Officer Bradley. They reached the Commonwealth, and while there, they captured and interrogated settlers, trying to find the location of their missing member, this Black Devil. They eventually found his hideout, but after he had left. We don't know if they ultimately found and retrieved the XO2 power armor. It all depends on whether or not they bumped in to the sole survivor. The Enclave suffered another loss when a group of gunners took out an Enclave vertibird in the Commonwealth. We learned that some of the surviving Enclave remnants managed to get their hands on some Brotherhood of Steel technology because the gunners who took out this Enclave vertibird managed to walk away with a Tesla cannon. possibly one of the Tesla cannons that the Lone Wanderer and the Brotherhood of Steel used when assaulting the Adams Air Force Base. In addition to their own lost technology, the Enclave Remnants learned that the Commonwealth was filled with pre-war fusion cores, plasma weaponry, and plasma ammunition. And so the Enclave Remnants, who were still organized, set up a field headquarters inside the Atlantic offices in the glowing sea. From there, they sent out Enclave patrols to secure checkpoints in the Commonwealth, much as Autumn had done in the capital Wasteland, to harass traders, conduct experiments on fauna, but most importantly, to retrieve any and all lost Enclave technology. This, of course, led them into conflict with many of the Commonwealth's dangerous inhabitants, including gunners and raiders, and even the sole survivor. But even if these outposts were destroyed, even if their field headquarters at the Atlantic offices was destroyed, we know that the Enclave still survived in some way in the Commonwealth. Where they are, who's leading them, what their goals are, aside from retrieving their own lost technology, we sadly don't know. Here, the story of the Enclave on the East Coast ends. But over a decade later, the Enclave on the West Coast reemerges. At the moment, we don't know anything about them. Are they remnants of Dick Richardson's Enclave from Navarro? Could the remnants of Eden's Enclave in Boston migrated all the way to the West Coast? Or could this be a completely different Enclave installation, like the one at Chicago, whose story we know nothing about? At the moment, we have no idea. But we do know that by the year 2296, the Enclave on the West Coast has reestablished itself in a fortified lab somewhere in the mountains, where they continue their experiments and their research, ranging from cold fusion to FEV. Perhaps we'll learn more about this chapter of the Enclave as the Fallout show continues. But for now, that's the full story of the Enclave. If you don't want to miss my next Fallout video, be sure to subscribe. But until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.